FCC Technological Advisory Council session, our fall session. This is going to be a very, very busy session, so I hope that you will all now buckle up your seatbelts. There may be some turbulence along the way, so be prepared, as they say in the airplane industry. We do have several announcements to kick things off today. First, and an important one, we have a new member of our body, Farouk Khan. Raise your hand, Farouk. Farouk is the president, Samsung R&D America, if I've got that right. And we're delighted to have both Farouk here and Samsung represented around the table. So it's good to have you with us. We also... He was in the hallway, and I don't see him now. But Scott Jordan, are you in the room?
He's coming back down.
Oh, he's coming back down.
He wanted to grab his laptop.
Oh, okay. So we'll introduce Scott when he arrives. We also have established a new relationship. Some of you are involved with the CSMAC organization with NTIA. There have been, in some cases, some level of overlap, or at least in a positive way, or at least interaction between the work of the NTIA CSMAC and this body. And to recognize that, we've taken the step of establishing liaison relationship between the NTIA and the FCC in the context of the TAC and the CSMAC. And so from that perspective, Rangam is here representing NTIA, and sitting next to him appropriately is Matthew Hussey, who is with the FCC, and he will be serving on as the CSMAC contact from the FCC. So we have that addition that we're bringing into the context. I would like to thank Brian Marquardt, the Consumer Electronics Association, and the IoT team that will be recognized later for the session they put in place, and that was a
GE and Comcast too.
A very valuable one. Yes, I have Walter's whispering in my ear to make sure that I cover all of the elements, but do want to particularly extend thanks to Comcast and to GE for bringing their wares in and making them available to us. Sometimes we talk about these things from a theory standpoint, but having the direct contact is really valuable. Now that he's back, let me introduce Scott Jordan, who is with us. Scott, raise your hand. Scott is the new Chief Technology Officer of the FCC, replacing Henning. I'm a little bit concerned about the flask that you brought in. If we could, so would be a new approach to these meetings.
Make it go smoother.
Yes. So you'll have to educate us on this approach, Scott. This is a West Coast sort of approach to these sorts of meetings. But Scott, it's great to have you here. We do have a very aggressive agenda today. I already suggested the fasten your seatbelts, but we have added, as most of you are aware, 2 new tasks to our already aggressive 5 tasks of very substantive items. And so in our same prescribed 3 hours, we will try to cover 7 different topics, all of which are quite important. But it's going to require us all to be moving at flank speed in order to cover those topics and to be focused around those. As we get into them, though, I would remind you all and put your focus on the long-held term that our chairman of the FCC and former chairman of the TAC used to prescribe, and that is that we be focused on actionable recommendations. There's a great deal of material and a lot of educational value in what the working groups have provided, and we'll all walk away with a great deal more knowledge, having previewed and reviewed a couple times all of the slides for today. But we do have to keep in mind that our goal is to change the world, at least the world associated with the communications arena. And so your actionable recommendations, focus on those is a watchword and a key importance. So if we could, let's make a quick lap around the table, particularly of value to the new members of our group. And Walter, as our leader from a FCC contact perspective, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Okay, I'm Walter Johnston. I'm with the Office of Engineering and Technology at the FCC.
And Michael Haas, same Office of Engineering and Technology at FCC.
Adam Drobot, Open TechWorks.
Teresa Hennessy, Comcast.
Fred Kemmer, GenBan.
Milo Medine from Google. Rangam Subramanian, NTIA.
Matthew Hussey, FCC.
Mark Bregman, Newstar.
Romani Pandurangan from XO Communications.
Len Merrill, representing NTCA.
Jesse Russell, representing Inc. Networks.
Steve Lanning, representing Viasat.
Farouk Khan from Samsung. Thank you for the introduction, and also Michael Ha, during the lunch, he walked me around and introduced all the members here, so I no longer feel new to the group.
Russell Jurek, Cisco. David Tenhouse, VMware.
Paul Sniper, Motorola.
Nomi Bergman with Bright House.
Lynn Claudy, NAB.
Rob Cubic, Samsung.
Brian Daly, AT&T.
Matt Chan, Verizon.
Kevin Kahn, Intel.
Greg Lappin, ARRL.
Jack Nicholsky from Qualcomm.
Mark Ritter, ATSC.
Marvin Serbu, Special Government Employee.
Mark Bayless, Visual Inc.
Brian Morfalter, CEA.
Dale Hatfield, University of Colorado.
Julian Apple, Wiki.
And again, I'm Dennis Roberson from Illinois Institute of Technology. So great to have you all here. We're going to jump straight in. Our first topic is, and I attempted, although I failed in the end, but attempted to line up our speakers across the table from me here. Short delay, and we're not going to do what the chairman of the FCC once did.
In fact, let me walk it.
But our first topic is mobile device theft prevention. This was a new request from the chairman to us in the spring. So this will be the first review of the work that this working group has accomplished. For that reason, I gave them a little bit of extra time. So those of you wondering why they got 30 minutes and everybody else got 20, since they didn't get the earlier shots at the target, we'll give them the time. And as you'll see, they have a great deal to share with us. It's a very challenging task, and Brian Daly and Rob Cubic are leading that effort. Rob joins us as not a TAC member, since we've just introduced our Samsung TAC member, but as a key person from Samsung, subject matter expert in this area, and appreciate both Brian and Rob taking the lead. And with that, you're on.
Well, thank you, Dennis. And you mentioned the fasten the seat belts. This is certainly a topic we're jumping right into where you need an extra tug on those seat belts. So what we'd like to report on is the work of the Mobile Device Theft Prevention Working Group, which Rob and I co-lead. If we have the slides, please. Today we'll talk about an overview and our mission statement. We'll give a brief update of the sub-working groups, talk about next steps, and there's some backup material in the slides that will be posted. As far as our mission statement, what we are tasked to do is to fulfill our charge of exploring the problem of mobile device theft and developing industry-wide recommendations for the FCC to deter and mitigate mobile device theft. And what we would like to do as part of this effort is to define key terms that are central to this matter, develop best practices for consumer engagement and education, explore stakeholder coordination and data sharing, ensure appropriate considerations of cybersecurity concerns, identifying gaps with existing solutions, analyze the potential necessity and value of new and technical operational solutions to deter thefts and enable the recovery of stolen devices, and finally identify standards organizations and industry fora to implement solutions. We have the opportunity to bring together diverse perspectives to analyze this problem and provide recommendations to this unique scale of mobile device theft. As far as the background, won't go through these in detail. I know this is an eye chart, Dennis, that you pointed out before.
This was I'll use this as a global comment. It is quite difficult, if not impossible, to read some of the slides, and I do encourage the groups, not just for those in the room. Remember, these are sent out over the internet too, so it's anything you can do to move the font size to a readable level is very much yes, and that's why I've just brought up my laptop. Others, you may want to follow suit.
So as far as a brief background, back in earlier this year, the Commission held a workshop on preventing of mobile device theft, and as part of that, this effort was kicked off within the Technological Advisory Council. We are exploring the widespread problem and develop a set of recommendations by the end of this year as tasked by the FCC chairman. Mobile device theft is a significant concern, and some sources report that the number of mobile device thefts has nearly doubled from approximately 1.6 million in 2012 to 3.1 million in 2013. By all means, this is a very complex issue, and it's present on both local and global levels. It's perpetrated as a crime of opportunity as well as a larger criminal enterprise. Opportunistic thieves can use stolen devices as their own personal media devices, whether it be a camera, music player, or Wi-Fi device, or they can sell their stolen device locally or online for quick cash. And larger criminal enterprises may ship the devices quickly out of the country. The stolen devices or parts thereof can be resold in areas of high demand. The SIM cards can be exploited to perpetrate roaming fraud, and personal identifying information on the devices may be used to facilitate identity theft or other fraudulent activities. The thefts have continued to increase in spite of ongoing efforts to decrease incidents of crime, and this could be a result of any number of factors. Consumers may not properly report device thefts or even know when this reporting should take place, and they may not be aware of tools that would aid in the recovery of stolen devices. Law enforcement entities are hindered by lack of data or sheer number of device thefts, and current stolen device databases aren't integrated and not easily accessible to most law enforcement entities. The flow chart here, which certainly will not try to describe in detail, describes or attempts to describe the current process of what happens, what triggers the triggering event that causes the device to be reported lost or stolen, and then either the consumer response or the device path and how that would flow today. This is input into the group that we are analyzing and looking at the current process. And as the next slide shows, we're looking at what the aspirational process is and the areas that potential changes could come in from the current process. And those changes are highlighted within the circles that are shown on the screen. And again, this would represent work in progress and areas for the working group to explore and an aspirational process to get to once we identify the recommendations. Should also point out the FCC has a docket out that was released on September 5th, 2014 to allow industry and consumers to share information to supplement the efforts of the working group, and it seeks comment and input from the public on proposals, efforts, and materials that will aid the TAC Mobile Device Theft Prevention Working Group in accomplishing our goals and objectives of the mission statement and better serve the needs of consumers. And to that point, we've got 120 Illinois Institute of Technology students taking on the challenge of identifying possible theft deterrence as a component of the Interprofessional Projects Program class. And many of these students have direct experience with their devices stolen. Their proposed solutions will have a useful validation background, and we will expect that their proposals and others will be integrated in the working group's results through the new FCC docket. The participants are listed on this slide. Again, Rob and I are co-chairs of the group, and there's a number of participants from a variety of stakeholders, and we welcome all the participants and their input into this effort. As far as our timelines, again, we're marching toward delivery of recommendations to the TAC at our December 4th meeting. We hold biweekly full team conference calls, and the sub-working groups that I'll define in a moment hold weekly calls to address the specific areas of their working group assignments. We've created 5 sub-working groups. The first is problem definition, to get our hands around what the problem is. The second one is to look at existing solutions. The third is a gap analysis, to look at what existing solutions the gaps are in terms of the problem statement, cybersecurity and privacy, and then finally consumer outreach. And we'll give a brief report on each of these activities of each of these subgroups. So I'll turn it over to Rob, and we'll talk first about the problem definition sub-working group report.
Thank you, Brian. As Brian mentioned, there are 5 subgroups here. These subgroups have been very active since we've had 36 working days since we kicked off, and I've counted we've had 36 meetings of this various sub-teams. So we're very active and working very hard towards finding a set of actionable recommendations here. The problem definition subgroup working group report is facilitator is Brad Blanken from CCA. I'll go through these charts real quick. Try to keep us on schedule, but I know in the appendix there's a little more detail, so please look at it online and look at that copy if you have any more questions. So the problem definition subgroup will be responsible for documentation of the mobile theft problems and issues as it relates to the mobile device theft prevention tools and solutions, including definition of terms, identification of scope, the scale of the current challenges, identification of challenges positioned from various stakeholders' views. They're looking at things like how is the device stolen, what happens to the device after theft from the viewpoint of the consumer, the carrier, the police, the law enforcement, criminal, a database provider, or insurance providers. So they're looking at a whole scope here. And also looking at from a manufacturing view, or carrier view, including issues such as the state and federal laws that have been, or state laws that have been enacted, and many proposed laws from various states and at the federal level, and their impact to this process. This group is going to document and report to the problem definition group and interact with the other groups going forward to develop actionable recommendations. The next group is the existing solutions sub-working group, and that facilitator is Ron Schneiderson from Sprint. Hopefully I got that right. Here's the list of the group, and sorry about it, this again being a bit of an eye chart, but this existing solutions sub-working group will deliver report and representations of current, existing, and planned solutions in this space from not only the U.S. but across the globe. Identify capabilities and aspects as they try to associate to the aspirational customer response flow. The chart on the right there kind of indicates where data has been provided. This has been a very active and fruitful group so far, and have looked at many of these solutions. They've actually gotten down to looking at classification of the solutions, and they have three basic classifications: a device-based solution, a database solution, and the operator implementations. So from the device-based solutions, you're hearing about the major OS providers and several OEMs delivering kill switch solutions directly on their devices. A lot of that's in response to the laws that have been enacted in Minnesota and California, understanding that those solutions may be modified going forward to meet the specifics of those laws. There are also other device-based solutions in various levels of maturity and of consideration or adoption here. There's database solutions where GSMA has a IMEI database that they track identifying devices. One of the issues they found there is the small number of law enforcement associations currently getting access to that data. Recipro is used only by one carrier for CMA devices. and the FBI's National Crime Information Center, which is an electronic clearinghouse for crime data, currently has local access for law enforcement agencies on that data. It has little impact on the problem right now, but we're trying to evaluate how that can be broadened and expanded. And we're still looking on information from stakeholders and the limited availability of that data. Operator implementations, the operators have committed to implementing blacklists for stolen phones. I think they're very far along in that, which include near real-time blocking of people trying to activate a device that's been blacklisted. Carriers are synchronizing with GSMA central database for GSM and LTE devices. One of the findings is there's limited support for the CDMA databases in there right now, and operators direct end users to OS providers, and manufacturers are also providing kill switch support for devices as the operators direct them. The next slide and group is the gap analysis, and here you start to see some of the merging of the first two groups together. The facilitator here is John Faust from the Metropolitan PD. So the gap analysis really is a three-step process. They started with the identification of what is the desired outcome from various stakeholders' point of view. They'll take that and look at the existing practices, which is coming from the previous group that I just mentioned, and try to identify the gaps or measures to bridge those gaps. So step one here, it's been a very time-consuming and focused process. They spent most of their time in this area, and they do have a good set of draft documents put together from the various stakeholders' point of view, from the law enforcement, the owners, consumers, service providers, carriers, device platform manufacturers, insurance providers, third-party vendors, government regulators, recyclers, and resellers. I just looked at this document this morning, and it was at version 19. So there's a lot of input being provided that, and they're doing a very good job. Step two is really the next step in this process, is to look at where they have the input from the existing practices and start to figure out where there are gaps between what the various stakeholders' and ideas are. So it's very, very good interaction between these groups, and this is a step that's ongoing. And then in about a week is estimated that this group will move to the actual identification of gaps, where they're comparing existing practices against desired outcomes and start to make proposals here and actionable recommendations. Back to Brian.
Okay, next we'll move into the cybersecurity and privacy sub-working group, which is facilitated by John Marino at CTIA. The mission of this group is really to look at definition of terms, identification of threats and vulnerabilities for mobile device theft prevention solutions, look at use cases to illustrate those threats and vulnerabilities, identification of mitigation strategies, whether they're existing or new, look at use cases to illustrate how those mitigation strategies may be applied, and finally identify standards, organizations, and industry venues that are relevant to the development of best practices. And again, the whole goal is to align with the recommendations by the end of 2014. Going back to our aspirational process flowchart, what is highlighted here are areas of consideration by the cybersecurity and privacy sub-working group. These are the areas of focus where it's believed that there could be threats and vulnerabilities that need to be investigated. There are existing anti-theft categories and types. First is software approaches. Looking at those, it's noted that it's cost-effective to implement, it's the fastest to implement and deliver to market, easy deployment, and easy software maintenance and evolution. There are hardware approaches which are more costly to implement, have a longer time to implement and deliver to market, a harder deployment, and a harder maintenance and evolution. And finally, network server or cloud-based approaches, which may be more secure, but approaches are not mutually exclusive, may be cheaper and easier to evolve than hardware alone. Device, software, firmware, and server-based. Some solutions are hardware root of trust, software and firmware and server-based, and finally paired network access blocking using the IMEI or MEID. Some of the assumptions that the capabilities in the event of a smartphone theft or lost, to be able to remotely lock or lock the device to prevent unauthorized use of network access, locate, which implies privacy considerations, remote access to device data, such as the call log, again, implicates privacy and lawful access requirements, disable apps, non-emergency and non-recovery, with the exception of emergency service requirements that have to be analyzed, remotely wipe the device, prevent reprogramming, re-enable if found or return to authorized user, and restore user data if possible using some sort of backup mechanisms. The Wi-Fi only device and the use case for Wi-Fi only, user-enabled recovery by third-party or reverse logistics, and secure reactivation absent the authorized user. Again, involves third-party logistics. There's also information sharing requirements for the IMEI or MEID if it's lost or stolen, and information sharing across providers and carriers, law enforcement, data aggregators and insurers, OEMs, OS providers, solution developers, and the consumer. The risk, vulnerabilities, and limitations look at exploits of device APIs, root attacks and rooting, jailbreaking the device, mobile device malware, ransomware, such as root attacks, inter-process communication attacks, and botnets, cross-platform malware using a laptop or smartphone, software updates and spoofing, rollback attacks, IMEI, MEID spoofing, man-in-the-middle attacks, implementation bugs and exploits, bootloader attacks, server-based attacks, and security credentials brute force. Some of the limitations are social engineering, trick consumer, the physical attacks such as a Faraday cage or a stolen briefcase, purse, or luggage, and the component value, stripping the smartphone for parts. The next group and the final group is the Consumer Outreach Subworking Group, which Jamie Hastings at CTIA is facilitating. This mission statement really looks at the best practices for consumer engagement and education, again, looking at coming up with a series of recommendations by the end of the year. There's a number of current outreach involving the government stakeholders. The FCC has a number of initiatives in process, which I will not go through each one of these in detail, but there are a number of consumer outreach efforts in place already that the FCC has instituted. Also, the U.S. Department of Justice breaks down consumer information by subject and provides online resources on various topics. And the FBI has National Consumer Protection Week, which it sponsors, as well as the FBI and the FTC working together to provide tips and guidelines for educating consumers on fraud, scams, etc. There's no specific stolen phone initiatives under the FBI, but encourages consumers to be crime smart. The industry has a number of efforts. CTIA has beforeyouloseit.org, a website that gives comprehensive tips on how to avoid losing your smartphone and what to do if it goes missing. There's also a public service announcement, the 5 stages of losing a smartphone, to illustrate what can be done to prevent any loss. CTIA has also created business card-sized tips sheets on the issue. And the top U.S. carriers have websites, tips, and consumer hotlines where customers can prevent or solve lost phone issues. In addition, the Metropolitan Police here in D.C. have their own initiative in place where they have posters which give guidance to consumers on what to do if their phone is lost and stolen, and tips on how to prevent the theft of their devices. There's other initiatives within the government and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which gives financial education service for adult students and kids, and they have some efforts underway. And Office of the Comptroller of the Currency offers links and to related agencies and organizations that can help consumers. Consumer behavior. There was a study done by the CTIA by Harris Interactive called Cybersecurity Research that was published in January 2013, in which 3/4 of the consumers believe the responsibility to keep their device safe falls mostly to them, and approximately 1/2 use a password or PIN to access their smartphone, which is much less than with computers. And of the small percentage who have had their lost or stolen phone, almost half contacted their wireless service provider, and consumers are more apt to protect themselves against tangible threats like loss of a mobile device versus intangible threats such as hacking malware. And many consumers have an app that remotely locks their devices if stolen. So the key initial findings out of the consumer outreach group was opportunities exist as most consumers believe it is their responsibility to keep their device safe. Opportunities exist on government websites for education and information. Their best practices in other areas include things such as social media, on-hold messages at call center, and awareness activities, and the use of the relationship with other key stakeholders such as law enforcement to get the message out may be beneficial. So as far as the working group's summary and next steps, the working groups continue to gather and analyze data and develop recommendations. We will present the final report and recommendations at the December TAC meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian and Rob. I was very concerned. What you have just done, the TAC has just received 34 slides in 22 minutes, so you've done very, very well. Now, I will, before you begin to feel too proud of yourselves, there are another 25 or so slides in backup, so there's a great deal more material to be had. As is our custom, this is the time for us to have the questions from you. Use your tent card on side when you have questions, comments, or things that you would like to cover. Before we do that, we do have a line up for this meeting, a communications line. Are any TAC members out on the greater world?
Yes, this is John Chapin. I'm here. Thank you.
Great, John. Good to have you.
Yeah, Dennis, this is Dick Green. I'm here.
Okay, great, Dick. Anyone else? Well, it's good to have the two of you. Since I've now had you introduce your presence, do you have any questions for the working group?
No, I'll defer to my colleagues in the room for right now.
Okay. This is quite startling, but looking around the room, none of your colleagues actually have any. Oh, there we go. Paul Steinberg.
I'll break the ice. So just a quick question. Are you thinking, the CTIA research was interesting. John pointed that to us as well. Are you thinking that this is largely a consumer responsibility and an outreach on the consumer's part to get them educated, or do you think there's some more systemic support that can be provided?
Well, I think the data shows so far that consumers think it's their responsibility primarily, but from the data, they're not taking the actions to protect themselves. So I think there's additional outreach that can certainly be done here, and understanding that there are solutions. Plus, remember, these solutions are just coming into the market. Apple's been out there less than a year. I know Samsung has their solution out there less than a year.
All right, seeing no other comments or questions, we'll move into our second topic, and I almost got everyone lined up, but Steve, I'm sorry, we got you at the wrong end here, so if we pass the famous clicker down to Steve Lanning will cover the 477 electronic data collection item. That was the other new item for the group introduced earlier this year. Steve, you're on.
Great, thank you. So I think ours will be probably pretty quick. Am I up? Okay.
I won't mention that Walt was playing with his iPad. I would not want to embarrass him by mentioning that.
Okay, I was looking for the. It's pressing the clicker, nothing's happening. So we basically have been asked to look at the 477 testing and to user test it, and we went through this with the objective of trying to improve. Thank you. of trying to improve the accuracy and the ease of submission for 477 data. We consider this to be an important task because it becomes a vital input to the national broadband map, and accuracy in that is vital not only for understanding what's going on, but is used by companies, I think, probably all of us. So the working group members worked hard and were represented from a variety of different backgrounds. This basically provided a natural setting for testing in that we had telecom, cable, satellite, small carriers, and that then exercised all aspects of the interface. So our mission, as I said, was really to basically improve the accuracy, and we had different phases that we were after, and we wanted to make sure that we identified issues. We wanted to flag them, report on whether or not they were fixed, and then suggest new things and ways of doing things better. And anything that's not fixed, to be trying to explain to people why they need to be fixed and what the burden might be if they're not. So that was phase one. Phase two, the idea is to look at new ways of submitting data, and those new ways could include things such as the provision of software to service providers so that they could input their own customer level data, and then that would then put back an appropriate summary which could be reviewed and then submitted. So this would help streamline the submission process as well as potentially improve the accuracy, because that way you're not going to have things being reported differently because you're using different GIS processes. So the defects, hang on, I can't read that thing all the way across the room. My new glasses haven't come in yet. Pardon me.
Thank you for underscoring my earlier comment about font size.
I did try. Okay, so now I need to make sure I stay coordinated. Even more of a challenge. Okay, so the first thing that we found was the 499 number wasn't found for everybody, and so the list was updated and then instructions were improved so that if you didn't find it, you would know what to go do. We found some issues in browsers, notably Chrome. Census tract drop-down menus on the fixed broadband subscription and fixed voice subscription interactive data pages did not work. That's been fixed. I'm happy to say that there was reduced complexity for satellite filers. So if every record would be the same in a state or group of states, then one block level record per state was sufficient. We definitely took advantage of that. Improved time for a fixed voice subscription file to move to the interactive state entry. That was slow and that was speeded up. The next state button in the state level interactive data entry pages basically improves navigation, and so that was something which was also changed. The helpful hint before continue to state button on the file upload also was added because it can take some time to get to the state level entry. So all of these things are basically making it easier to go through. A small but potentially meaningful thing to especially small filers was to accept lowercase and uppercase .txt extensions in the README zipped mobile broadband deployment and mobile voice deployment. So previously you had to only use lowercase. There was a rather annoying thing that would happen during timeout, which was you would get a technical error has occurred. This was particularly bad since processing would continue in the background, and with a message like that, you would think that you had failed. So that was fixed to go back to a login page. There was also an improvement in the messaging after submission, and so basically telling you how to go make changes, and that helped. Whoops. Okay, the next thing was that instructions were improved, and while that may seem like something which is cosmetic, it actually makes it a lot easier to use what's there. So there were clarifications of that you didn't actually have to see the DBA name used in the fixed and mobile broadband deployment data. That doesn't have to match precisely the company name associated with the FRN. Instructions were added to the user guide on the upload and file processing times the users should expect. So it takes some time. As much as it was tried to reduce that amount of time, it does take time, and knowing that makes a difference. Added some clarification that you enter your data rates in megabits per second with up to 3 decimal places, and added language in the instructions of what to do if you didn't find your 499 filer ID. More improvements clarified that if filers replace any of their tract level fixed voice subscription data after entering state level totals, you have to re-enter the state level totals. And that's meaningful because that's a manual process to go through. So if you went back and made changes, then you basically have to go back and start from scratch on the state level totals, or you will get an error. Highlighted that companies that participated in the NTIA State Broadband Initiative can download census block data on broadband deployment from the National Broadband Map website, or possibly obtain such data from their state's mapping entity. So that helps potentially reduce the burden of having to produce these things yourself with a GIS system you may not have if you're a small company. As I've already said, the biggest thing was really the slow processing of large files, and this is really an ongoing issue. It's onerous to filers. It's not a showstopper, but it certainly is disturbing to sit there and see the little blue circle going, go away for hours, come back, and it's still going. So suggestions for fixing this, obviously faster processing of large files. Even the largest of files that we're submitting are small relative to current standards, and it just seems unreasonable that it should take so long to validate and accept a file. There's got to be a better way. Once that file is uploaded, I know that there's processing, virus check, validation, are the records unique? But none of these are big tasks, and the opinion of the working group that those things should be measured in seconds, not really in minutes or hours. So a suggestion is, some kind of a service level agreement with the developer to meet reasonable processing time. In terms of other features that could improve things, one of the big ones is the ability to just simply download data that has been uploaded. This is the common practice when you're doing a auction. You can download the data that's been uploaded, but we would like to be able to see it ourselves and know that what we think has been sent has actually been received. And that really comes from if you made some changes, you'd like to see that those changes are actually there in the final file. A certification page, something to submit to a state as proof, in particular, section-by-section report of what's been submitted at the state level. Right now, you can kind of get around that by taking a screenshot that you've successfully submitted, and presumably everything is there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what you're telling the state that you have absolute proof that that's been submitted, and so that's an ask. Another idea is to offer filers this an option to submit data for multiple sections in a single file. So, for example, if it's possible to be submitting things at blocks, perhaps you could include all of the data at the block level once, rather than having to submit state-level submissions at the end that could be rolled up, or even tract level. Just do it one large file and be done. That's as an option. Some submitters or filers may not want to do that, for privacy reasons. And then there's the idea of submitting all data for the filing in a single bulk XML upload. So our next steps are to report on the actual experience from our submissions. The deadline for submissions is really just coming now, and so we haven't had an opportunity to talk about our actual experiences. I know that my company managed to get it in, but we haven't been able to discuss it. And then the FCC staff is still continuing to make improvements, and so we can update on those improvements and start our phase 2 work. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Any comments from anyone? Walter, you want to start out?
Just one question. I'm interested because it relates to issues we've experienced. Do you have any insight as to why the processing and validation of small data sets takes a long time? You must have had some discussions. And you want to offer any opinions on what's going wrong?
Even on our calls, I was opining on what I thought was wrong, and then I stopped myself because we didn't actually see the internal architecture of how data was being processed, but it certainly had telltale signs that there being bottlenecks. And, talking to Chelsea before the meeting, I understand that some of what I was concerned about is actually coming true, which is if you're taking a long time to file and then you have an arrival rate of request to process files, then the load starts to grow rapidly and things stop processing. But typically, when I would work with things like this, I would be actually I'd probably have staff that would do it, not do it myself at this point, but to identify the bottlenecks and to then attack those bottlenecks. There's got to, as I understand it, it's in the validation step where things are hanging up. I suspect that maybe you're using some old code for that validation step, but I don't know that.
We do have some old code.
Lynn?
Yeah. Hey, Steve, thanks for all y'all's work on this. I was going to ask, I know we're involved quite a bit as far as trying to help prepare some of these things as far as for companies, but the question that I had is, a lot of these folks out here have these non-GIS maps, and they're having to go ahead and take that and get conversions as far as to the census blocks. Have you seen anything as far as from any of your reporting from folks as far as being able to try to get that done as far as in this time period, as far as working through this process?
We really only had one small provider who I don't think had their own GIS group, or maybe two, and basically that was really where the direction for going to the NTIA or to state maps came from. And we actually asked people to go check that out. I believe one of our members did do that.
Okay.
Hey, Steve. I know that we've had a lot of the upload problems, so I can see you smiling across the table. Do you see the upload problems where we have to go in and kill an entire upload series? I know that we've had to experience be an inhibitor to go to phase 2. And what can we do in the TAC to try and help figure out how to prevent that and fix it? Because I see that as being an inhibitor to achieve phase 2 if we're trying to do a summarization between the customers and the mapping.
Well, my understanding of phase 2 is that we would be new software that would actually do this, and I'm hoping that this is a little bit more modern and well-written software. That, as I view it, we'd be basically testing this new software to see how well it worked and whether or not to even accept it as working. But in terms of the large files, one way around that is to break those files up and to submit them piecewise. You can do it that way. It's not terrible, but it for some reason things do validate faster when you do it that way.
Thank you. Milo.
Yeah, I think one of the suggestions my team had was that there be actually a stress test where everybody tries to upload at once, because given the filing deadlines, this is not an uncommon exercise. Given the performance that has been seen now, I think if we did that, the commission may have to go out and issue waivers to deal with delayed filings. And so, given all the funding with ECFS scalability recently, it would be good to get on top of this before the next filing deadline, or at least work with the carriers to make sure that things are staggered.
Yes, thank you, Milo. We did talk about doing that, and it's an excellent idea.
Any other comments from the group? Seeing none? Steve, again, thank you. Thank you for the group and the good work in this area. It's another one of those sticky ones that hopefully we can work our way through. This blasting the system, as Milo has suggested, may be one of the ways to find out just where the issues are. Okay, continuing on, and we'll pass the clicker back down the line to Lynn Cloudy, who will talk to us about spectrum and receiver performance, work that group is undertaken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Spectrum and Receiver Performance Working Group is not a new working group, so it's an old working group. And I'll be talking about...
Are you speaking personally, or is this...
I'm not sure the average age of the working group members, but in terms of the time period of the group, we've been around for a while, and we'll be talking about the work that we've done since the last TAC meeting in the middle of June. So our mission has not changed throughout 2014. We're making recommendations on improving access to spectrum, making efficient use of spectrum, providing support for the interference limits policy proposal that the working group made over the past several years, as well as analyzing and making recommendations in the enforcement area that would track the needs of how RF spectrum is going to be used, especially in a shared spectrum environment in the coming years, perhaps coming months. These are the participants in the working group. We cover a wide gamut of spectrum users and service providers and manufacturers and advisors in general. Many of them have opinions, and they're not afraid to express them, and that's a good thing, I think. So these are our areas of focus. There are three main categories there. First of all, recommendations about the statistics of interference and a topic area called risk-informed decision-making, which we'll talk about some more. Then second, interference resolution, enforcement, and radio noise. We are looking at new enforcement paradigms and new enforcement strategies. This is actually now a cross-organizational topic where there is coordination with the NTIA Commerce Spectrum Management Advisory Committee, CSMAC, as was mentioned by the chairman, and they are looking at enforcement through the lens of shared spectrum environments with federal users and federal and non-federal users. And then third, we are exploring technical topics on receiver performance and emerging radio technologies from an interference mitigation point of view, with especially with respect to shared spectrum kinds of environments. On that last point, from the previous slide, we have some follow-up business we'd like to take care of today. At the June TAC meeting, 3 members of our group, Dave Gurney, Greg Lappin, and Jeff Mendenhall, made a presentation to TAC members prior to the TAC meeting, and also interested FCC staff, about receiver technologies and what they do with interference mitigation. And that presentation was not distributed beyond the group that was there in real time because of some initial concerns about potential copyrighted information. That was all eventually taken care of, and we distributed the presentation last week, I believe, to the TAC, to the email distribution list on the TAC, asked for comments. We didn't receive any comments. Today we would like to get the TAC hopefully to approve posting the presentation on the TAC website, on the FCC parent website, so that a wider audience can benefit from the principles and the concepts that were presented last June. So, Mr. Chairman, if it would be appropriate, we would like to ask for TAC approval to post that June presentation as it was distributed to TAC members last week on the TAC website.
All in favor? Opposed?
Thank you very much.
Approved. Unanimously.
We will do so. Now we move into the areas of current study, and the first is this risk-informed decision-making in general, but for our purposes, it's risk-informed interference assessment as a particular topic. We have the situation, especially in the concept of shared bands, where there are lots of variables, and those variables can take on lots of values. And so determining protection from interference in terms of specifying harm claim thresholds in our interference limits policy proposal is a very challenging exercise. And where do you pick the harm claim threshold? Typically, people will talk about worst case scenarios or reasonable worst case scenarios. That's typically the way the FCC regulates spectrum control in the past. And worst case numbers are considered safe in terms of being the least offensive metric to the most number of people sometimes. But even worst case has an element of, well, what do you mean by worst case? There is always an element of, and we debate the use of the word, but I'll use it, an element of arbitrariness about any particular level criteria that you say before was no interference and after is interference. And worst case tends to favor incumbents who will insist on no new interference, whereas a new service doesn't have a history to rely on and may accept some interference. So this idea of worst case tends to offer the maximum amount of protection to incumbents and maybe not the maximum amount of opportunity for new entrants. So perhaps taking some form of account of the statistics of how interference occurs could be both a more equitable way to split the scarce spectrum resource between incumbents and new entrants, and would result potentially in a more efficient use of the spectrum, of which we have no more. So efficient spectrum use is a good thing. So our goal is ultimately to make recommendations about the use of statistical methods and use the paradigm of risk-informed decision-making as a path to those recommendations. The opportunity here is to manage risk or to spread the risk appropriately so that spectrum is not underutilized as it would be if you're overly conservative, but if you can gain some insights from combining worst case and probabilistic analysis, and perhaps the regulatory decision-making process might be improved, at least in some appropriate cases. So we've looked at analogies and analogous examples by industries such as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where you can just kind of intuitively understand that something may be very unlikely to happen, but the consequences can be so dire that you can't afford to take a chance, not with nuclear power plants and catastrophic events associated with them. So the situation as to whether in spectrum use, not regulatory or nuclear situations which are fixed, but in spectrum we have both fixed versus fixed kinds of situations and fixed versus mobile situations where you have organizations. 3GPP has looked at some of this. The FCC itself has grappled with these issues, as well as whether receiver standards are appropriate in some cases, and if they are, why would receiver standards lead to potentially economic disparities and not being able to compete with other receivers that didn't conform to those standards and so forth. So we're looking at case studies that involve things such as the strong, weak adjacent channel case, meaning you might have a new allocation where an incumbent device in a neighboring band receives a very weak signal and it's vulnerable to a very strong signal in the adjacent channel from a new entrant. So this is common in mobile-to-mobile situations. It also occurs in broadcasting when you're near the edge of coverage. It occurs with satellite receivers and radar systems and many others. So there's a sub-scenario of the fixed and non-fixed transmitters and receivers. That's the case with cellular user equipment interfering with digital television receivers, or a cellular base station interfering with GPS receivers, or mobile radar kinds of situations. And for these case studies, having a comparison between what happens when you do a worst-case analysis versus what happens when you do some probabilistic analysis on the interference might be some instructive kinds of cases to look at. There are advantages and disadvantages on both sides of this. On the positive side, it's always easier for us as humans to say, well, let's decide everything can be measured as a single number. We like that, and it seems to be a safe choice. And in fact, it does tend to afford the maximum amount of protection for incumbent services that are already in some kind of stable economic environment, and that is to their advantage. Part of the problem is that worst case really is not usually the actual worst case. It's something at the conservative end of a range, but it's not at an end point. And in fact, there usually is no end point because this is kind of a long tail distribution of something. But engineers have to in some way draw a line in the sand about what level of performance one expects and under certain conditions. But there's always some element of arbitrariness that creeps in there. Worst case analysis hides the fact that a point on the tail of a distribution has been set at some kind of an arbitrary level. So in a way, we're kidding ourselves with using worst case as a single number figure of merit, at least a little bit. And maybe you end up with something that is suboptimal. So on the other hand, when you use probabilistic risk analysis, it has some advantages. It may not be simpler, but it is more of a realistic kind of rubric, and it gives a way or a path or a currency to do comparisons between scenarios instead of just single point on a curve kind of comparisons. So it exposes what you know and what you don't know and what you know you don't know, to quote a previous vice president. And maybe it provides some highlighting where the technical record is currently not sufficient for what we'll call reasonable decision-making or spectrum-efficient decision-making. So in essence, this all comes down to the one graph in this presentation. to solve these three questions. What can go wrong? How likely is it? And what are the consequences? And that's embodied in this chart here, where the y-axis is consequences and the x-axis is likelihood. So you have increasing risk as you go up and to the right on this curve. So when you have a severe consequence and a very high likelihood of it happening, that's a big risk. And conversely, something that has a very low likelihood of happening and something you really don't care about anyway is something you don't have to be concerned with. It has low risk. So with this kind of framework, you can look at more than one scenario as opposed to the single case of worst case analysis, and that might be something the FCC has some interest in as they go forward with some of these unique spectrum adjacencies. So these are the topics we think have some merit for further action in this area. Getting some know-how on the subject just socialized within the fabric of the FCC would be if nothing else, a good mind expansion experiment, and putting that into action with some practical proceeding that would provide some tangibility on the subject. And so we're looking for good examples that would embody this. And we want to stay away from things where we have these horrible consequence kinds of things, life safety issues or places where people might die. That's not a good place to initially try out some of these concepts. But within a tangible example, we hope to test the concept against the cold, cruel eyes of practicality and see if there's some merit for the FCC to take a closer look at this. Second topic we are continuing to explore is interference resolution and enforcement. The group produced a white paper in the leadership of Dale Hatfield that was approved by the full TAC membership last June. It is on the TAC website, and the concepts in that white paper are being further explored in our continuing weekly calls. This is now the cross-organizational topic that's being dealt with by Dale and by Chairman Roberson on the NTIA CSMAC, which is developing new paradigms for enforcement in spectrum sharing between federal and non-federal users. So that includes rules that would anticipate interference possibilities. That would be ex ante in the Latin use, and it also includes interference that is detected after service onset or ex post. So we tend to use the phrases ex ante and ex post methods depending on when you knew about the interference and when it occurred. So this goes down to issues about, do you know that you're actually transmitting a final issue of channel surety or assuredness or compliance? When you think you're doing something, how do you know you're actually doing that? With some of the newer spectrum access systems, how do you know you're actually transmitting on the channel that you think you're allowed to use when there are so many places where other decisions could be ignoring the advice that you're giving the equipment? So we're also looking at channel use compliance. In terms of continued work, we're looking at the interference resolution and enforcement issues, especially those areas that have a spectrum access manager and controlling spectrum access based on database lookup kinds of techniques or geolocation of devices. And how you monitor and measure in that new environment is going to be different. And it's certainly a lot different than triangulating the location of a pirate radio station using a direction finding RF equipment in an FCC van. So our dual representatives in CSMAC are looking at developing a strawman proposal on how enforcement functions in this case would work and how to identify transmissions with call signs or other identifiers so that you can track down and find responsible parties for interference causes that you may find through forensic analysis, not necessarily from direction finding vehicle triangulation. So there are further areas of study in this topic area, in the area especially of identifiers, and working with the NTIA group to refine the strawman proposal, and also to see if we can find a database of RF recordings that would help forensically in detecting and analyzing interference, which is a lofty goal, as is the often spoken desire to look for data on the ever-rising RF noise floor. We think it's ever rising from all the plethora of RF emitting devices that are out there, some intentional, some not intentional. And we're looking at these methods to ensure channel availability and security in a database-controlled shared spectrum environment. On that latter point, and that's kind of a new area for us, one of the issues that has come up is how to make sure that what a spectrum access manager, database manager says to do is actually being done by the transmitters it supposedly is controlling. Unlike a central network control of the previous licensing regimes or the current licensing regimes in the FCC, you know where transmitters are, you know what power they're licensed at. We now have at least the concept of distributed control and local firmware that actually is the thing that's controlling tuning of transmitters and receivers at a base station level. And I guess as it turns out, that local firmware can be tampered with, or it may not have been altered properly for the new versioning that was up in the last upgrade. And there needs to be an assurance step that overall systems are operating the way they're supposed to when you don't have one place that you can positively say this is the state of the system. All that means is that there are practical considerations to applying what works very well in theory, and that's not a big surprise that there may be gaps. But channel use compliance, at least as we're calling it, is an important concept if this type of spectrum access control is going to survive and thrive as a tool in the new shared spectrum world. Especially when you have these band sharing arrangements and you have different tiers of users, and there are current proceedings where such proposals are going forward. You have different kinds of interference control and different kinds of security expectations and capabilities. So the ability to assure that the various users and the channels are being dealt with appropriately is certainly not a trivial assumption. And a channel that has a compliance regime that is trustworthy is a valuable concept. For instance, one way this could be made fail-safe is if the commands from a spectrum access system were to be directly delivered and acted on at a base station in a way that it couldn't be tampered with by different versions of firmware or by some kind of nefarious intent. And those are concepts that are being explored by the people that are implementing those systems. So those are our topic areas, and these are our deliverables we think can be achieved in the fourth quarter. First of all, recommendations on risk-informed interference analysis, including a report on a practical example of applying this technique with two or more classes of a radio service. And as a corollary to that, we'll report on the relevant statistical factors in setting regulatory policy as it relates to control of interference. We will refine our strawman enforcement proposal as to how to deal with enforcement in a shared spectrum environment and what that might mean in terms of changes to the structure of enforcement in a regulatory agency. And we'll look at technologies such as automatic identifiers and RF measurement data that can enable interference resolution and enforcement in new and hopefully spectrum-efficient ways. So that is the end of our presentation, and at least some of our subgroup leaders are here, and in any case we look forward to questions, comments, constructive criticism, and anything else you have to advise us with.
Great, thank you, Lynn. Thank you, group. There we go, Milo.
Just a couple points. I think with the advent of modern SDRs with pretty broad RF stages, we have the potential for all kinds of devices to generate interference in bands, even without any kind of spectrum sharing. So I think the dynamic about enforcement needs to be focused not just in the context of a database-driven system, but in the kind of reality of the technology that we all are living with now. Secondly, part of what we're looking at on our sub-working group, the devices themselves, if they're controlled by the SAS, right, the radio resource management systems of this infrastructure, could report up interference to the SAS, and the SAS could say, "Oh, wait a second, this interference shouldn't be here because I do have global knowledge of all the authorized devices," right? And so turning the users or the access points into a sensor network that can help with enforcement actually is an enabler that's that the database system allows. And I think when we look at more systemic enforcement in this kind of much more complicated environment, we're going to have to go, as you said, well beyond what trucks with DF equipment do. And so we need to think about this in the design of our systems, because I think there's a lot of data that all our devices and infrastructure actually has about interference that can be used to be for enforcement.
Thank you. Excellent points.
Any others? I guess just to follow up to Milo's comments, as you acquire the information that you've just described, one of the things that I think the working group has dealt with is what do you do with it? The fact that you know that there is interference is one thing, but the ability to cause that interference to go away is quite another. So it's...
At least it's being contemplated so far, the SAS systems are not tasked with enforcement. So the question is really, only the Commission really has that authority. So the question is, what kind of interfaces can you bridge? So if you had the data, what do you do with it? Printing it out and faxing it is probably not a good idea.
I would just add that that's one of the things we're looking at in the straw man, is trying to look at where those interfaces have to be and what sort of data exchanges have to be among the different people who have information on that's useful in interference resolution and enforcement.
One further idea, given the crowdsourced world that we live in, is creating a bounty system to find interferers and to empower users to actually set up systems. Because if you've got transparent data about who all the authorized users are that is in the SAS, then that allows somebody, a third party, to potentially go look for interference correlated against what's in the SAS and report up. And so you may actually take advantage of the SDR revolution, right, and generate a small Uber-like business here of crowdsourced interference detection.
So we have an actionable recommendation for the FCC that you establish a bounty hunting program.
And a snitch network.
Yes. Oh, Walter suggested a snitch network that would complement the bounty hunting. So this is...
Those are well known and used by the government.
Yeah, so this is...
Is there any way we can work in IRS
So this is
records too?
an actionable recommendation that the working group can consider. You may wish to...
Yeah, we may change the language a little.
You may seek to draft Milo into the working group as well. Dale's been looking for a partner in some of this activities, and Milo, you have some very good ideas. So be very careful if you see Dale heading your direction immediately at the conclusion of the meeting. Any other comments in this area? This has been, as Lynn described it, a long service group, which is not to be confused with the age of the individuals involved in the group. But yeah, well, so we both. But this is coming to some interesting concluding points, to some structurally, being quite serious now, so it's some very, very difficult long-standing issues that the FCC has dealt with for, I started to say years, but decades is probably a more appropriate measure of the time frame that these issues. So, while we have a working group, certainly the inputs from the whole TAC in some of these areas will be more than valued, and coming up with actionable recommendations in these areas is really, really important. All right, any questions or comments over the phone? I neglected to offer that opportunity in the last go-round, but anything out there? Okay, moving on then to our advanced sharing. Brian is doing double duty today, so Brian and Ed Chen, would you take it away on advanced spectrum sharing?
Hey, thank you, Dennis. So I'd like to report on the Advanced Sharing and Enabling Wireless Technologies Working Group. If we could bring the slides up on the screen, please. Thank you. Again, just a quick review of the charter of this group is to establish an advanced sharing framework to enhance spectrum efficiency while protecting incumbent services, including both federal and non-federal services. To identify and evaluate enabling technologies to enhance sharing efficiency, develop requirements for protection of incumbent services, and encourage coexistence of federal and non-federal systems. And finally, provide recommendations to the Commission regarding the establishment and objectives of RF Model City, where the proposed advanced sharing framework and enabling technologies can be tested and evaluated. Sanyogita and myself co-lead this group. And we have the members listed on this slide, and we'd like to thank the FCC liaisons for their effort as well. The Enabling Technologies Sub-Working Group. This subgroup has had presentations on a number of subjects related to the technologies and techniques to enable spectrum sharing. We looked at the evolution of LTE and LTE Advanced and interference cancellation technology. There was a study testing conducted by NTIA to look at the coexistence between LTE small cells and radars. We identified candidate spectrum bands to be targeted for sharing, looked at in-building propagation analysis for possible sharing of spectrum with outdoor incumbents. And the aim of the sub-working group is to create a menu of technology options to enable spectrum sharing to the greatest extent possible. Looking at LTE Advanced brings different dimensions of improvements. First off, if we look at carrier aggregation, looking across multiple carriers, carrier aggregation across multiple bands and across licensed and unlicensed spectrum, what that allows is to leverage wider bandwidth to bring higher data rates measured in bits per second. Looking at leveraging more antennas, downlink MIMO up to 8x8, and enhanced multi-user MIMO and uplink MIMO up to 4x4. This will give higher spectral efficiency. And finally, the leveraging of heterogeneous networks with advanced interference management will allow for higher spectral efficiency per coverage area. Enhanced receivers also offer better user experience and more capacity in terms of interference cancellation. The 3GPP standards in Release 10 and 11 brought in a number of interference cancellation techniques. Release 12 added to that for the data channel. This gives higher data rates, especially at the cell edges, more network capacity, and even more beneficial in managing interference in small cell environments. Some of the examples of LTE features for sharing, if we look at immediate shutdown, enabler for spectrum clearing is effective but drops calls. Graceful shutdown, again, for spectrum clearing, it's effective but transmit dynamic range issues. Cell barring, again, could be used for enabler for spectrum clearing. Desired UE behavior will depend upon the mobile device state and use with other features. And uplink power control interference management gives exclusion zone reduction benefit and depends on RF conditions and path loss. So the current LTE standards and commercial equipment do support some of the enablers that serve as a foundation for a spectrum sharing solution, and future LTE releases and products will enable additional capability through such features as carrier aggregation, load balancing, and others. The key learning out of interference cancellation and suppression of LTE Advanced is it's a very important aspect of LTE and LTE Advanced, and today it's used to improve data rates, especially at the cell edge, and add network capacity. When an interfering signal's waveform properties are known at the victim, interference cancellation can be used, but when the victim does not have the knowledge of the waveform's property, interference suppression can still be used. And an LTE UE has at least 2 receive antennas, and an eNode B can have 2, 4, or 8 receive antennas, so spatial filtering would be a powerful tool for interference suppression. As small cells are deployed and HetNets become operational, interference cancellation can be even more important because the cancellation allows the HetNet operator to achieve the greatest possible gains from the small cells. And the recent testing conducted by NTIA looking at LTE small cell and radar coexistence verified LTE is quite robust vis-a-vis other radios, the radars, and even when the interference is very high. However, further study is going to be needed of modern radars with a higher duty cycle. And using an appropriate SAS and lower power LTE small cells will enable coexistence with radars with relatively small exclusion zones. The other area looked at was in-building only sharing, and this would be an option if outdoor sharing creates too much interference. The Enabling Technology Subworking Group reviewed additional propagation loss of various types of building material, and it was also discussed a recent study of satellite to indoor measurements. Given the demand of in-building services, this also could be a sharing option to consider. And for example, some of the penetration loss at 5.85 gigahertz, the penetration loss between paper insulation, foil insulation, and brick and wood siding and cinder block walls show between, somewhere between a 12.5 and a 22 dB loss with that type of material. So using this data and looking at the frequencies in use, it's possible to develop a sharing model where you can reuse those frequencies inside those buildings. It's also looked at the satellite to indoor measurement campaign, where a wide range of elevation angles to the transmitter was evaluated, and surrounding buildings being of the same height, looking at both line of sight and non-line of sight, depending which is illuminated by the transmitter. And measurements were made at 5 different buildings. And that data showed that obviously the loss on the first floor is going to be higher. There's higher loss at higher frequencies, and non-line of sight loss is going to be higher. The approach to shared spectrum is to look at preferred candidate bands. NTIA has lists of candidate bands, and the ITU-R has candidate bands for IMT that they've developed, and some of those bands are possibly restricted in the U.S. Less than 3 gigahertz bands are advantageous for coverage. There are fewer incumbents and smaller exclusion zones are desired, and certain applications may require smaller bandwidth than wireless broadband services. When we look greater than 3 gigahertz, these are more suitable for capacity enhancements, may be able to handle varying degrees of incumbent use. The outdoor service offers more flexibility, and in-building service may offer additional interference protection mechanisms, and expected spectrum yield should be more than 100 megahertz per band. And there should be consideration for both licensed and unlicensed applications in these bands, all bands. The next several slides, the next 4 slides, actually list a number of the candidate bands coming out of listed both in the ITU-R recommendations as well as NTIA. It highlights who the federal incumbents are, what commercial and global use could be there, and comments that the working group had established. I'm not going to go through each one of these in particular, but what I will do is there's a summary slide here. Which shows the sharing recommendations, the bands for TAC consideration. And the Advanced Sharing Working Group recommends the Commission to consider these bands for future sharing. And that specific sharing model would depend upon the incumbent types and available tools to manage interference among various systems. The next subworking group is the Spectrum Database Subworking Group, and this looked at a wide range of solutions that may be involved to enable dynamic spectrum sharing, and it should be considered in the Spectrum Database frameworks. They looked at fixed rules and devices, things such as limits in power adequate, strong detectable signals, local sensing and unlicensed, to adjustable rules in the database system, sensing networks, time-specific exclusion, fixed exclusion, sensing networks are more complex detection and better sighting, database-driven, and if undetectable or constantly on. The spectrum database protection zones, dynamic spectrum sharing between incumbent and secondary users, taking advantage of both spatial and temporal patterns of incumbent use, would allow for more efficient spectrum utilization. The protection zones may be used when the incumbent use is present. In cases when incumbent use is static and or cannot be shared directly or indirectly, when secondary user static protection zones may be used. Static zones are those that never change when the primary, whether the primary is present or not. Dynamic zones would reflect presence or absence of primary via primary assistance or passive collaborative monitoring. It's preferred that protection zones be defined based on the incumbent protection criteria rather than fixed geographic areas. The challenges in realistic propagation and interference modeling, and a hybrid of fixed but reduced exclusion zone and a signal-based protection zone may be used. As far as passive and active spectrum management, passive may use channel ranking. The database aggregates measurements from unauthorized user networks to assess quality and rank channels and provides to authorized users a ranked list instead of a static list. This would be similar to but an enhanced variation of TV whitespace. Active secondary channel management would allocate channels to authorized users to minimize aggregate interference to primary and maximize secondary capacity, and channel reallocations should be minimized to protect networks. Active management may be more efficient but requires coordination if multiple databases are involved. Passive management is simpler and may still be viable in some bands. Some of the key learning and other issues to be discussed, boundaries and allocations between systems being shared should be based on interference protection criteria, not on fixed geographic boundaries like exclusion zones. Spectrum databases should be given flexibility to manage specific frequency assignments to maximize overall capacity of the band. Enforcement and security are two key issues to be addressed by multi-stakeholder organizations, standards bodies, and regulators, and strict and clear requirements need to be defined and used in certification. As far as the RF Model City, there were a total of 13 responses from OEMs, small business, carriers, associations, and cities. There was general support of the RF Model City concept, and some demonstrated high interest in moving forward. Several bands listed here have been suggested with various applications serving commercial, federal, and public safety interests. There's mixed suggestions on exclusive use and dynamic sharing. There's a suggested that new flexible experimentation rules to deliver governance and support stakeholders to develop, plan, test, and report transparently. And funding suggestions range from entirely private funding to a public-private mix. Usage fees and funding models similar to the EU programs were also suggested. And NSN had comments on propagation measurement, which is an area of interest for the Advanced Sharing Work Group. So the next step is to continue discussion on candidate bands and enabling technologies. The Enabling Technologies Subworking Group will continue examining a range of technologies to create a menu of options to enable sharing in a variety of circumstances. And per Nokia SEMA Network's comments on RF Model City, develop a framework for propagation model for future sharing simulations. Propagation model has the greatest sensitivity on determining the size of protection coordination zones, and the working group will collaborate other streams of similar efforts and provide recommendations at the December meeting. And advanced database discussions we want to advance the database discussions into actionable recommendations as well.
Thank you, Brian. Are there comments from the TAC? Dale, please.
Just a clarifying question. When you're talking about sharing, are you talking about bidirectional sharing in your candidate bands, or some of those that are existing non-federal allocations that the feds could then begin to use? Is it bidirectional, or just the commercial sharing with federal? Does my question make sense?
Yeah, it may.
The scope it is a bidirectional, and it could be amongst the commercial and commercial as well as commercial and federal.
So those bands were a mix of both.
Mix them up, right?
That's
Yes.
what wasn't clear to me.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Other comments or questions? On the phone? Any comments or questions from the TAC members on the phone? Okay, Walt, you have
Just one question. We heard from in the earlier presentation the whole concept of trying to move from worst case to statistical analysis of impact of these new technologies. Do you have any practical suggestions, or have you looked at the issue of how you move off this contest between a legacy holder that wants assurance that they're not going to be adversely impacted and maybe numeric analysis that suggests that there's a balance point? In terms of model cities or other things, are there practical directions we can head to try to assess what the real risk reward is for going to a different yardstick for measuring interference?
I don't think we've looked at that aspect as of yet. Michael, you have any thoughts?
So I think when it comes to sharing between federal and commercial licenses, I think there needs to be some sort of a trust to be established, and that requires certain trial systems to be in place so that people can, so to speak, kick the tires. So once that happens, I think people will feel more comfortable about a certain propagation models and what additional margins they can tolerate. Without having any of that, I think people will be have a tendency of protecting their assets by imposing more stricter, propagation limits or some other, theoretical values. So just the question of how do we go from where we are now to where people feel comfortable opening up a little bit more based on a real systems that has been tried out and people feel comfortable about it. So that's, I think, the scope of RF model cities and a lot of other initiatives that we have on the table.
Walter, I think the pragmatic approach we've been trying to do is recognizing the incumbent, what is the use, and then figuring out what is the minimum place that we can share, more so than just going right for the most complex model where the SAS can do everything for us. I think pragmatically, if you want to see RF Model City become some kind of reality, we're going to start from some kind of pragmatic place.
Mm-hmm.
Sharing.
Microphone sharing. It's a complex concept.
Just a couple points. We've been going through the comments on the model city, and we'll be working with NTIA to figure out what the next steps are, so stay tuned on that front. And just one other thing as you're working through sharing that I think for incumbents, and I'm not talking about any specific issue, is that when the sharing is built around the characteristics of the existing system, and the concern for the incumbent is that they're locked in forever. and nobody wants to be in that situation. So it's one of the things as we think about sharing is, well, how do you both share, whether it's in steps or dynamically over time, and still provide the freedom for the incumbent service to grow and make changes that it needs to, and it's a tough problem.
Milo, please.
I think one of the other things to keep in mind is having bidirectional communications between a database and authorized users does allow you to remove authorization, right? It's not like it's a one time you're good to go and then see you later. So that ability to control admission and to be able to relocate users is an essential part of the SAS control interface, and I think that both gives some level of confidence to the incumbents that if interference is detected, that you can push back and push users out, as well as for future systems that may come in, because it's dynamic on both sides.
Okay, any other comments? Let me throw one out then, that in both of the last two working group presentations, the presumption is the focus on the SAS style of three-tiered structure. I'll just throw out as a toss-up, my European friends are quite convinced that SAS is an impossibly complex approach to spectrum sharing, and have proposed a much simpler approach, LSA, license shared access. And I wonder what either of the groups, either of the last two groups would think about that, since the topic of LSA hasn't come up in the conversation at all. And I'm kind of looking just over the bench here at a proponent of ASA with our friends from Qualcomm and where that might be. But is there a perspective that anyone would like to share from either of the two working groups on this area? Blank stare.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. ASA/LSA is just one form of SAS. So in fact, it creates a lot of internal and external confusion, because there are the concepts ASA, which is the same thing as LSA, and then separately we have this concept of the SAS, but the ASA is just a way to implement a SAS. So to the extent, for example, and it's in the slides, to the extent that the work with NTIA that we did, testing, shows that the LTE small cells were actually quite resilient, and so that the coexistence was possible within a short exclusion zone radius. One way to enable that would be using a SAS that implements ASA. You could also implement that using a SAS that's implemented a different way. And then the only thing about ASA is it's standardized in ETS. So there are certain concepts in the system reference document for ASA that are that enable a system to operate in certain ways. Another system could operate in different ways.
Very good. That was Mark, please.
One question on with the license per coming in, the people have the primary frequency utilization, and you have the shared part. On this model city, have you looked at what type of applications or providers would come in on the shared side? What type of applications could live in the type of environment for the shared that would be running in the model city?
I think it is open. There's some discussion within the working group where there are certainly some, broadband applications, but also there's a strong voice saying that don't discount some of the narrowband applications to be able to come in and utilize that spectrum as well. So I don't think the working group is making any determination one way or another.
Okay. I'm just trying to think, because as you start looking at the way the shared is operating, I was trying to think of what type of applications that I would think about running into something that would run underneath those type of applications, and I'm sort of drawing a blank. So I was just wondering if anybody's thought about what type of applications would be willing to work in those type of constraints in the shared part.
Yeah, I think it's generally been viewed to be a very broad set of applications, existing applications that would just be operating in a shared environment, with the understanding that there's some predictability to the amount of time that they'd be able to use that spectrum, and usually with the caveat that there's some alternative, namely what they do today, as the backup for using this additional spectrum. That's
I
often
think
the way it's thought about.
It goes back to the first couple of slides about LTE Advanced as an example, so you can dynamically add bands for capacity use on a spot basis. That's essentially some of the typical use case I think you'll see first.
Yeah. So that is a specific example where it works pretty easily, adding additional capacity. Since I teach these things, I'm constantly. Nyquist told us all about this. C equals 2B, more bandwidth, more capacity. Oh, Kevin, sorry.
Yeah, it strikes me that the bigger problem you're going to have on the Model City thing is the lack of scale to sell into, right? I mean, so much of our market is determined as a national market and then an international market, of course, beyond that, finding the people willing to make an investment in equipment and deployment costs that's only applicable to a very small sub-piece of the national marketplace seems to me to be the biggest obstacle to getting learnings out of the Model City idea. It's just, people are too damn mobile, and the equipment they carry is too damn mobile, and are you really going to try to make an investment in equipment upgrades that would take advantage of this stuff when it actually only benefits a very small geographical area in the initial rollout? And I mean, ideally we would, it's a learning opportunity, et cetera. On the other hand, there's real costs associated with trying to do that, and I suspect that that's actually a bigger barrier than even what the apps are. Because even for the case that, we've normally been thinking about, which is just the add capacity case, it's still a pretty sizable investment that could potentially be out there for very little benefit during the test phase, unless you have a very well-defined expected path forward from that to broad availability of this. So, I mean, it seems to me you almost have to structure this in a way that says, yeah, we're going to start this, but we expect it will work. The purpose of the program is to allow us to abort if it doesn't work, but, the full expectation is that this is not a sunk investment that goes away when the experiment's over.
I think that's good characterization, this latter part in particular. Let's keep moving on then. We have had a change in the order of things in my well-ordered fashion. Nomi has graciously given her slot in the agenda to the Thing 1 and Thing 2. They introduced themselves at the start of this.
Those
so
are the two movies?
This is... And so, David and Russ, take it away.
Yeah, that thing. Okay, so let's get the slides up. There we go. So real quick, I want to hit on a couple key points up front here. One, we have a very diverse and wide working group or list of team members, and that's helped, I think, in terms of leading the discussion and fairly encompassing a lot of the topics we've been focused on around IoT. Just real quick on our charter, I think we're well in line with identifying the key areas in terms of what the impact will be to the network from IoT evolution, what some of those demands are, what the technology policy challenges are. In fact, there's a fair number of policy challenges, and also how the FCC can foster IoT innovation. So we've had, I think, a very productive summer. This is a list of what our focus has been and some of the action items the team's been drilling down on. I think at the June meeting we presented our taxonomy to the FCC, both the taxonomy on sort of the markets, the thing-to-thing, thing-to-proxy, thing-to-cloud market, as well as the taxonomy on the standards. So we've taken that and drilled down much deeper into what we think would be a relevant focus for the FCC and for the TAC. And part of this leads us to sizing, which is a little bit further down the list in terms of sizing the market. So there's several position statements we've put forth in the last 3 months. The safe harbor statement, we'll go over each one of these in a little bit more detail in the following slides. Privacy, end of life, and coexistence or etiquette. And today you had the opportunity to see 4 individual demos, 2 that were consumer-based, 1 that was an industrial demonstration, and 1 which I would call, thanks to Comcast, a technology demonstration. And that was that. Okay. Oops. I lost my slides. Hold on. So the other thing I talked about, the IoT sizing work has been a significant amount of effort. As we try to get our hands on how big IoT is going to be, there's a tremendous amount of estimates, forecasts, predictions in terms of numbers of connected devices, anywhere from 20 billion to 1 trillion over the next few years. So part of the exercise we've been doing in the last few months is narrowing that down, looking at the focus, also looking at some disruptive technologies that can impact that. It's not just about devices, it's about the impact to the network and the impact on traffic. Some of those include video as a sensor. What other disruptive technologies could have an impact on IoT? The other big topic, of course, is security. One of the key topics is, really comes, the question that comes to the group is, what is the FCC role with regard to IoT security? We do believe there's a line between, we're somewhere in the network, we're not sure where, of edge devices, sensors, and then somewhere deep in the network, there's a handoff between IoT security and cybersecurity. And we're trying to define that in more detail. But it's some of the discussions and work we've done over this past summer. In addition, we're working on removing some of the barriers and incentives that the FCC could provide in terms of a longer-term innovation for IoT in the United States. Okay, so first off, I want to cover our safe harbor statement. And this is really in relation to IoT devices that connect to the network. We see them as long-lived, roughly 8-year life or greater on average. Average is very difficult because IoT is still fairly nascent today. Also, to avoid spectrum support issues over this long period, it's recommended that such devices and the networks to support them utilize unlicensed operations where practical. And I'm reading this verbatim because we were very careful on choosing the words on this statement. The last part of it is the recommendation is critical whenever a safe harbor from wireless technology evolution is desired. And that's a key, there's some key operative words in there. If you're going to be deploying IoT devices and you want some type of safe harbor, it's probably best to use unlicensed, because there is this evolution on licensed. Just like today, 2G support may be is fading. So if you built your whole business case around 2G, you're going to have a problem. IoT privacy statement. Let me switch to the next slide here. So what we're seeing, too, is the ubiquity of information due to the Internet of Things is creating privacy challenges in our society. So some of our recommendations, these are snippets, by the way. The full documents have been sent to the TAC team, and some of these are fairly lengthy documents, 4 or 5 pages long. So these are very small snippets, and we tried to get some of the meat in these slides, for instance. So the recommendations are for the FCC to work with industry, develop and get an understanding of current approaches that support the reliable acquisition, transport, use, and exchange of information across the different vertical service market groups. Second one under privacy is work with appropriate agencies and industry that define norms applicable to Internet of Things. There's a small typo on line 2 on the slide. The third one is understand public concerns and the impact of data breaches in relation to IoT on the consumer. All that being said, our viewpoint is the TAC doesn't really foresee the FCC playing the lead role. Rather, the FCC should be well informed and a party to these discussions with either other entities, organizations, or government agencies. And then the next one is the IoT end-of-life statement. This one's a little bit related to safe harbor, but it's got a little some key differences here and a little different pointed direction. So technology, whether for application, transmission capacity, or device, has an expected viable lifetime, and IoT-capable products will be no different. However, end-of-life issues associated with IoT can be especially challenging given the intersection of the very low cost and long expected life nature of these IoT devices. We expect very, very low-cost IoT devices. So when you have those low-cost devices, they're going to probably be fairly static. So that leads us to a couple of the recommendations here around end-of-life or end-of-service announcements be made publicly available sufficiently in advance, allowing parties to manage the impact of EOL actions. That gives people time to upgrade, people time to download new software, whatever's required, to migrate their IoT deployments. End-of-life, end-of-service announcements should consider and, where possible, highlight critical exposures that the end-of-life action might create, i.e. if it adds additional security concerns or problems after that end-of-life. This is kind of common across much of the industry in terms of end-of-lifing of products, software, et cetera. So I'm going to turn over David wants to talk to etiquette. No puns. Emily Post.
Really? Just before I do that, one thing on the EOL, as with many of these, we've tried to understand the FCC's role, and it's probably more likely that the FCC will be involved in the EOL of services than the EOL of the things themselves. Right? Again, that will probably be more handled by by the kind of normal consumer channels that protect people with EOL issues today, FTC, et cetera. The etiquette item is a new one, and actually we'd love to get input from other TAC members and thoughts on also where there may be opportunities to cooperate with some of the other groups. It's always kind of fun when you work on these study groups to come across something and say, oh, okay, this might be worth having a deeper look, and probably a deeper look than we're going to take this year. So, I won't read these verbatim. We'll speed up now that Russ has got the biggies done. But basically the statement here is that unlicensed, particularly in the kind of digital world for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, et cetera, so unlicensed as we know it and as it's been very successful, has grown up with a sort of digital etiquette regime that's been pretty successful. And we haven't had major tragedy of the commons type disasters. One of the reasons for that is that the standards organizations, although they initially butted heads a bit, have actually cooperated quite well. So I think things that can be done to continue to encourage that would be very good. Where the other side of it is that unlicensed has also provided room for people to innovate and introduce things that are not yet a standard. So we want to make sure people that do that are nonetheless encouraged not to essentially introduce things that are going to interfere unnecessarily or unduly with some of the standards-based items. So I think those are pretty much common sense bullets. The interesting one is the notion brought up by a number of our colleagues that there are some new technologies available, new thinking on technology. They're not necessarily yet available, but definitely new thinking on technologies and on new ways to achieve spectral efficiency that may require coordination or may require that everybody working within a band agree to observe some stronger, truly digital etiquette. Ironically, the digital etiquette today is actually pretty analog. So it may be really, the bottom line here is, now might be really the right time for the FCC or the TAC or some body, could be industry bodies, to have another look and say what might be the next steps in the evolution of digital etiquette going forward. So I think that's, we'd like to get feedback on that. We will probably take that a little bit forward over the next few months, but if it's worth follow-up, it's probably more in the context of a next year activity or an industry activity. So that's I think the main one there. And then the final bullet concerning IPv6. I think is fairly straightforward. So do you want to continue on sizing? Click forward. Okay, so I'll just keep moving on sizing. Basically this has been a bit of a thankless task, and I appreciate that some of our colleagues have actually jumped in and really done some work. It was kind of, to be honest, hard. We've all seen many different estimate studies, et cetera, but really kind of trying to dive in and make some sense over it. Overall, I think what I'd say is that the bottom-up studies are considerably lower in numbers than what you might call the bigger vision marketing studies. And so there is a gap there. We looked, though, particularly to sort of see what the patterns were, almost independent of the absolute numbers. And this is an area where we'll continue to be doing some work. So one of the, the caveats in all this is that we felt that most of the studies that we're looking at, the analyst studies, are sort of projecting forward from today. So what's really not being addressed is the new apps or changes in the variety of the data or the traffic intensity the devices might generate, and particularly the traffic intensity. You'll see Russ mentioned it earlier, and we'll come back to that again. That seems to be where there's sort of the wild card here and room for surprise. And I think we've all seen this in general in kind of technology forecasting, that the forecasts tend to be somewhat optimistic initially, and then you have sort of the more conservative forecast plays out until the moment where something changes, right? So we'll be continuing to keep an eye on where those changes might come from, and have identified some ideas here. So Russ,
one quick comment on that last slide too. If you notice the financial expectations, they're 73 trillion is the top one in terms of impact financially. So I think there is a reason and a cause, at least from the money and the economic impact, to take a deep look at this and the impact. Plus the estimates on the bottom in terms of device activations, 80 per second today, moving to 250 per second in 2020. So.
Yeah, and that last one is probably one of the more conservative estimates. Yep. On activations. Yeah. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So part of this drill down that we did, and I want to thank John Barnhill, and you said it's a thankless task. John usually is the challenger of thankless tasks, so yes, we will thank him. But he drove this one. We had dozens of reports, I'll put it that way, so there was a lot of time reading and trying to parse them out. We did hold meetings with quite a few, and we've got some slides here. So this slide, for instance, is courtesy of IHS, and we thank them for sharing that and letting us share it publicly, because these are typically paid reports.
That's the left-hand side.
Yes.
The big part.
Yeah, not the notes on the right-hand side. So if you take a look, too, here first, what we would look at were the global numbers, because we're really trying to tie this back to kind of a U.S. impact from the TAC perspective or the FCC perspective. Then we took a smaller drill down and looked at the U.S. market only, which we distilled out of the global numbers. And then we looked at the Internet of Everything, which included all types of devices tagged, non-electric, et cetera. And then we drilled it down to Internet of Things. So there were multiple drill downs. And then in that process, that's not on this slide, we've also drilled down into PAN, LAN, WAN, which we'll get to in a minute, and the types of connections that these devices have. Now, keep in mind, most of the reports are talking about numbers of devices. And that's an important point to note, because when we look at the actual impact to network traffic, it's going to vary based on what those applications are, not numbers of devices, obviously. So some items to consider here are the disruptive models that we're starting to see. Relatively, the cost of data and the cost of compute, with cloud capabilities going to very small costs. I won't say zero. Oh, I did. You look at the transient data and the use of analytics on data. These are all having big impacts on how devices are connected and how they go across the network. And just that point on the cloud computing, The first wave is about connecting directly to the cloud, and that creates potentially some network issues we'll talk about. The current projections, by the way, are based on current applications that are available today. So we always have to keep in mind there's always a new killer app that comes up that can change things.
Okay, just want to jump in on this chart. You'll notice that the kind of, as you move on the top right, there's this box between unconnected and connected. That's really the big difference. I think everybody here knows that, but just to reassert, we've been producing billions of devices per year into the market of embedded devices. That's been going on since the 90s. It's nothing new. What's new is they're finally getting connected. The other that's something many people have foreseen for quite a while. What Russ alluded to is what you might think of as the new is that as those devices are getting connected, they're exfiltrating in a lot of cases much more of their data up to the cloud than we might have expected in the past. So with the advent of cloud-based services and that drop in prices, that's kind of changing the model from if you'd kind of read somebody's report 5 or 10 years ago, what might have been expected.
Yep. So let's hit the next slide. Oh, yeah, next one. So when we drilled this down into the 4 areas of wired, PAN, LAN, and WAN, since this slide isn't animated, you can see immediately which we decided to focus on in the box, which is the PAN and the LAN, or the various technologies in those 2 boxes. And the reason for this is when we reviewed what's happening with sort of the wireline network. Now you could argue that all these hit the wireline network eventually, but wireline networks have fairly sufficient capacity, in our view, to handle a lot of the growth, and we'll see some growth on the next slide. The same with the WAN we went through, and it was a bit surprising. A lot of the different vendors' reports showed that the growth, at least on the the 2G, 3G, 4G side, was good growth, but it was not significant growth. And I think some of that too, it's how devices are being connected to the network. Towards our safe harbor statement, a lot of devices are using unlicensed bandwidth. So next slide. And this is just a quick graphic. Again, this one is thanks to Harbor Research, another company we worked with. And these are numbers of devices, remember. So when you look at the compounded annual growth rates, wireline still has a significant volume, but the growth rate's one of the smallest. If you take a look at the WAN market, again, there's 31% CAGR there, but it's it's a wild card. It's managed, it looks like, though. And by the way, when we looked at the use cases driving that, a lot of that's going to be around transportation and automobiles. At least that's the forecast of today. On the WLAN side, or the LAN side, pretty decent, 30%. It's not crazy, but you look at the volume and you look at the capabilities of Wi-Fi, that's where we want to drill down a little bit more and determine whether it's just an etiquette issue, whether Wi-Fi can handle this, and what the problems are. And that's what we plan to take a deeper dive over the next 3 months. And then last, the PAN, significant growth there. Same issue, we need to take a deeper dive there in terms of what the impact looks like. And just some initial observations and next steps on sizing. I'll turn it back over to David for security. One slide there. Again, you see the blue bullet or blue box on the right. We really need to start to look at traffic volumes versus quantity of devices. That's the real metric here. So I think we've done a fair amount of drill down work, and we're now getting a good number on some of these things. So the key next step is to construct those scenarios and the traffic intensity patterns. The other concern that we're taking a good look at is most broadband networks today are very asymmetrical in terms of nature. Downstream to upstream traffic is roughly 10-to-1 ratio. So when you look at maybe some new type of what we call canary in the coal mine type application like Dropbox, networks today are really designed for delivering video potentially downstream. You look at applications like Netflix, it works great. But think of the reverse. If everybody starts to send in, it's very simple to put in a drop cam instead of another device, but it's video now, and it's much more data intensive. They could go up to the network, and that will have an impact, especially the way with the asymmetric architecture of most networks today, at least on the broadband consumer access side. So I'm going to turn it over to David, and you're going to take a good deep dive on security.
No, I'm not, because I'm watching the time here. Yep. So very simply, lots of devices entering the market. A lot of them we think are going to be pushing more content than we might have expected a few years ago to the cloud, so there'll be more content transiting the network. And we think a lot of the edge devices may not be as equipped as we'd like to address security exposures in terms of the ability to remediate, particularly as those devices get older. Over time, their security capability, in effect, may decay. So bottom line here is it will broaden the attack surface, create new attack vectors. That's the message on this chart. Moving forward, our additional observations are, in many ways similar to what you've seen with privacy and in other areas that, the FCC, going to the middle bullet, I think that's the key bullet here, really needs to define what its role is within the landscape. And it's probably not going to be about the security of the things themselves or about their cloud-based services, but it's going to be about the protection of the network and avoiding widespread disruption and things of that ilk. This still is a TBD, so you're getting kind of very initial notice. This chart is labeled initial observations, not recommendations. So in trying to sustain time for our colleagues, we'll go on to the next steps. We have work to do still in security. We have a lot of work to do on the sizing and understanding the implications of that sizing for the network. And as we've indicated, it'll be focusing on what are likely to be the traffic patterns or the traffic intensity coming out of the devices, or at least what are some different scenarios for that, and is there anything to this concern about upstream versus downstream. One item that we have not made a lot of progress on is exploring ways to stimulate investment in innovation, and the counter piece of that, which is eliminating barriers. We would actually really appreciate input from our colleagues where people are identifying barriers. We have not really seen strong FCC-imposed barriers at this time. A caveat there is we've been operating under the assumption, going back to our last report, that spectrum for LAN and WAN, there will be a need for new spectrum for LAN and WAN, and that will be made available, and that the FCC will be monitoring that requirement. But we sort of haven't seen a sort of major kind of barrier from the Commission at this point. But if other people are seeing it, we'd really love to get your input now so we can get to work on that. Yep. Any other? That's about it.
Yeah, just one call out on security. There was a bullet there. The industry has demonstrated that they've reacted fairly quickly to problems that have happened in the market. Just want to make that call out.
And that's sort of I don't want to say it hasn't happened before, but it's definitely a new change in terms of we're seeing with some of the recent events that industry, in a lot of cases, I think for security breaches, people already knew what the answer was. It just wasn't being implemented. Now that we're seeing breaches that are of larger financial and or of social implications, we're seeing the industry act much faster, and that's encouraging.
Okay, Nomi.
Yes, two things. One maybe comment/question and one question. The first one is about your comments about upstream and symmetrical usage. I guess I would caution that I think we have to be a little careful about saying that applications like DropCam could cause us to have more symmetrical usage. We've, as a service provider, we've been watching this trend for a long time, and thinking that a service like, say, Skype, which grew exponentially faster than a DropCam, or a Dropbox, would contribute to more symmetrical usage, and we've not seen that, and it's just because the downstream is growing at such a rapid rate. And so I would caution us to be to stay very fact-based with us, because those are very those are somewhat dangerous comments if they're not fact-based. And so far, when we look at the facts and we study them in detail, as an industry and individually, we're not seeing what you're saying. So that's one. And then my second comment is just when I look at slide, these ones, the ones about the connectivity techniques. One thing that's a little bit confusing is there's one thing where the device is initially connected, to anything, right? And then how the device gets connectivity back to the internet. And I think that's confusing here because it makes it look like something like, say, Wi-Fi is equal to cellular or wired, if that makes sense. Like you might first have, say, a Bluetooth connection to get onto a network, but then you still have to backhaul the traffic. And I wonder if there's a way to reflect that in some of this, because I think otherwise it looks like we're looking at one or the other. Whereas like Bluetooth alone wouldn't be enough for connectivity. Mm-hmm.
Right. So the first question on the broadband piece, again, we said, is that a canary in the coal mine? We're not presenting that as factual. It's something we're going to explore. We're looking for what the disruptive applications could be and whether there is something like, this is a discussion we've had across the working group. Is there a canary in the coal mine? What would it be? How would we know? Because once it catches fire, it could become a problem. So that's and we had a Yogi Berra comment or quote in there. Everybody's heard it, so I won't repeat it. But it's hard to figure out what that canary in the coal mine could be or what that actual could be. On the breakdown on the wired PAN LAN WAN, that's really looking at. So the breakdown is very specific on trying to look at the impact to either, for instance, Bluetooth versus Wi-Fi versus LTE, and very specifically trying to define, is there a problem in terms of how those are connecting in that spectrum range? And then obviously there's going to be, we've done this taxonomy piece on thing to thing, thing to cloud, thing to proxy / gateway. So there will be gateways, there will be devices in between. We're trying to focus on, and that's the really difficult part, Nomi, and you called it out well, is how do you drill that down? Because everyone talks about devices, and even the report folks are now very interested in working with us because they see the importance of the traffic is the real concern, or the traffic's where the real meat is to have something valuable. So.
I believe, John can correct me if I'm wrong, that the numbers there are all on sort of what's the first hop, the first link from that sensor or actuator into the network, and not deeper than that. Right. We previously looked at backhaul, and we sort of said, okay, we're going to separate. We can separately look at backhaul. That's a challenge that we sort of understand. And for backhaul, what we need to know is how much are we adding to it. As opposed to that first getting just to the first MUX point.
If that first hop is in somebody's home, the connectivity, the bandwidth is less of a constraint.
That was
it's just in your home. So
that was kind of the statement from the earlier, but there still would be a need, depending on how much LAN and PAN spectrum, might be required.
Sure. Okay.
Part of the real message. We got to keep going.
Here.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting topic, but we're moving. Jesse, you haven't had a chance to speak yet today. Quick.
Just one question. How did I noticed the recommendation as unlicensed spectrum? How did the group reconcile the security issues with unlicensed, with IoT devices, particularly as it migrates toward the enterprise environment where you will see the growth of small cells in licensed bands, which would also want to connect to IoT devices? It just seems with the increase in cyber attacks, I think that would be a problem to depend totally on.
Are you talking about the safe harbor statement?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, we did look at, was there more security from licensed or unlicensed overall? We didn't actually see that there was a technical fundamental difference. So the safe harbor recommendation, and this is something that came up at the last meeting, was very much geared to the issue of technical evolution. So if from a moving, the FCC's kind of stated direction of trying to move particularly licensed spectrum, onto the new technology as fast as possible. And so that's where that focus on the unlicensed was coming from. Another way to put it is it would be kind of counter to the current policy or current direction to say we're going to provide a safe harbor in licensed and start, choosing bands and say, hey, you're good for 20 years.
Right. Thank you.
Walt wants to comment.
Just a quick comment. We addressed this some time ago, but I always like to quote the eminent Kevin Kahn, that I think it was Kevin who said that you can't rely upon the network for security. Security has to come from the end-to-end application itself. So while we would recommend best practices on the wireless network, if it's a secure application, the application has to provide the security.
Okay, eminent Kevin Kahn.
Actually, it fits well because I agree with the general notion that the FCC is probably not the lead on security issues but should participate. On the other hand, just an observation that when the inevitable explosion happens, the political blowback is going to hit a lot of folk. And the FCC, unfortunately, I think, is one of those agencies that's likely to be, well, why the hell didn't you do something, And so it might behoove the agency. I mean, you're never going to be ahead of the game, really, but it would certainly behoove the agency to sort of realize the political blowback will occur, and to the extent that it can, be active as getting that message out ahead of time that this is a shared responsibility for the people that are doing this, and it is not some magic government agency that's going to solve these problems.
Two comments. One is around industrial internet and the whole enterprise angle here around IoT. I think that's where a lot of the security exposures might unfold in the future, and I think that's a place we may want to take a look at in the next TAC agenda. The second thing is. There's a lot of innovation happening on the internet itself around IoT, and specifically around cloud services. There's a cloud service called IFTTT, IFTT, and a lot of your location and house switch, light switch, and other kinds of data resides in this cloud. Now the question is, is this an FCC problem? Whose problem is it? It's actually not even the device manufacturer who basically creates an API and interfaces with this cloud service. So it's going to be a little bit complex equation here to solve. It might be simultaneous, it might be differential, but it is something I think, I don't know if we have full control over this whole issue, but something we may want to take a look at as well.
Dale?
How are we doing on time?
We're over.
Okay. I've had my time.
Right. Your last one.
I'll make this very quick. You talk about the next steps looking at the traffic patterns and traffic intensity patterns. I think the one thing to keep in mind is that these devices don't have one characteristic. There's many different characteristics of the devices. Each are going to have various QoS requirements, various data rates, various latency, various mobility, various reliability requirements. So I think it's going to be difficult to characterize it as one. I think you need to really look at the different QoS characteristics.
Okay, very good. Paul. Oh, you're next. They swapped, so you. Cybersecurity.
So the thing is where it's supposed to be.
I have it. You sent it in.
I have it too.
Well, I said he's coming.
You really don't have it? Okay. Okay, maybe we will switch real quick. We're having technical difficulties.
We'll back to cyber.
So Nomi.
It's been attacked.
Yeah. The cybersecurity has been deleted from the text.
Is that a security problem?
Yes, it's definitely a security problem.
We're suspicious.
Are you putting Nomi up? Yes. Okay, you're on.
Slides down.
They're up. No.
Okay. So this, our working group is supporting the transition to IP. This is a continuation of working groups from prior TACs, and we've been doing our best to pick up kind of where they left off and not repeat ourselves. This slide lists all of our working group members. Hopefully, I've gotten them all. I would reference that we've also had participation from Vonage, Brendan Casper, and Earthlink, Jeannie Dale. They've both been working on two of our sub-working groups as well. So thanks to the TAC members as well as to the FCC working group members and several others. It's been a really great group. It's a really good group of contributors. So in today's discussion, just first maybe I'm going to go through a refresher of our original mission, talk about our approach, update where we are, and and receive feedback from all of you. I think, yeah, maybe on just really briefly about our approach, and I'm going to come into it just for the big picture. I'm going to get into it in some further slides, but what we've been doing to look at our mission, which is how can we help to accelerate are there insights we can share with the FCC that would help to accelerate the IP transition, and at the same time also solve some of the most difficult problems that are perhaps slowing the IP transition, things like corner cases that where the PSTN network provides services to the disabled or services for public safety. There's issues like that are slowing the transition. So do we have insights back to the Commission for how they can accelerate the Commission? So what we've been doing to look at that is, one, we've been conducting some surveys with various service providers and with equipment manufacturers, and we intend to complete some more surveys, and I'll give you a quick readout of those. We've also been doing some architecture work, and I'm going to share a little bit more about that in some further slides in a moment, and looking at these corner cases, things like services to the disabled or elevator phones, things like that need to be solved to keep the transition moving along. So that's what we're going to share today. And then, as I've mentioned, we've been trying to incorporate work from the prior TAC working groups as well as good work being done by organizations like ADDIS. So this is just a recap of our original mission, the 6 bullet points that were given to us by the FCC. And again, this is, I think I've mentioned most of these. Maybe I would also point out that we've been asked to look for opportunities for where accelerating the transition would fuel innovation and research and development. So, I think I might have gone. I might be missing a slide here, but so again, we've been conducting surveys. This slide is an update on common themes that we shared during our last working group about survey results that we've learned from surveying small rural service providers. We've also done, and I'm going to share today, some surveys with mid-sized providers and some equipment manufacturers, as well as some satellite providers. And we hope to conduct some further surveys looking at things like some of the corner cases further. So this slide, maybe I would just point out, and again, we went over this at the last meeting, but some of the really interesting things that came up in surveying the small rural operators were that they were actually more advanced than we were expecting, and this often happened because the employees of those operators were really part of their communities in which they lived, and they were very long-term in their investment thinking. And so many of them had already really solved some of the most difficult problems in advancing their network. And so I think we were pleasantly surprised that once the middle mile solutions were solved, typically many of the other problems were more easily solved just because these service providers were so long-term in their thinking. So I think, and again, we went over this at the last meeting, so in the interest of time, I'm going to move on here. So since the last meeting, we've now also conducted some surveys with mid-sized rural providers as well as satellite providers, and some of the themes that were different from the small providers with the mid-sized providers were that we learned that they provide service to rural areas using more like centralized design work and budget work. So they often have a centralized team they can rely on. We found that they were generally about 11% fiber to the home, so they are making year-by-year investments in moving fiber closer and closer to the home. And they were also, and we saw some of this with the small providers, but they were also amenable to using different technologies to solve some of the harder-to-reach areas, such as using satellite for a hard-to-reach area. We found that soft switches were being used to serve both TDM and IP customers. In the satellite providers, we found that more satellites are being launched to improve performance in all areas, and there were we saw very promising expectations or very promising new technologies of newer, smaller satellite technologies that can fuel speeds up to 50 megabits per second, so we were excited about that as well. Oh, thanks a lot. Thank you so much. With satellite technology, the majority of the capital is not spent until the customer signs up. And I'd also point out that last point, I'm not sure if you can read it here, so I will share it here, is that digital beams can be used in the future to reach areas of high demand. So great, really good stuff. We also, we're just starting to survey equipment manufacturers, and a lot of these survey results reflect the service provider results. They really, they reinforce some of the same themes. Sorry about that. So they reinforce many of the same themes that you can see the equipment manufacturers noticing these characteristics of the smaller providers, that they would be amenable to trying new technologies and making long-term investments. So we saw some of those same characteristics there, that the manufacturers would reach out to the small providers to try new technologies. And then similarly, as we'd expect, they saw that large providers offered broader scale and fast implementation along those lines. So basically, we're seeing very good things out of these surveys, showing us that service providers and manufacturers are all very interested in moving the transition along and making good investments in new technologies that solve many of the problems that we're looking to solve. So I'm gonna skip over that slide. So what's our plan? And actually, I have to thank Dale Hatfield for suggesting this to us. And I think we shared this at the last meeting, that we decided to develop a reference architecture to spend some time studying the various digital IP infrastructure technologies, to look at how are they each evolving, and what are the common elements that they all share, and what does that tell us in terms of how those networks are evolving, and how the networks can then provide these future services to customers. So we've split up into two separate working groups: an access working group and a backbone working group. And we're going to give you a readout today from the access working group. We're still working through the backbone working group. Marvin is leading the access working group, and he's going to share an update there. And Tom McGarry of New Star is leading the backbone piece, and he'll likely share an update at our next meeting. We're hoping that this reference architecture will provide us and the FCC with technical context that would essentially serve as headlights to help us to understand what's coming around the corner. So I think that this is just a quick diagram, which would be very difficult to see from here, of the 6 components of the reference architecture we're looking at. So the 6 components are the access network, the regional network, the transport core, the internet, the external networks, and internal core. And I realize this is hard to see here. I think that we've also distributed it to everyone so you could take a closer look later. And again, this part probably needs a bit more work. I think that our access network piece is a bit more mature at this point. So I'm going to pass this along to Marvin next. Right.
So in the access network, we define the access as everything from the home up to the first router. And we also looked separately at in-home networks. We looked at a number of access technologies, from digital subscriber line, fiber, hybrid fiber coax, wireless, satellite, and a similar variety of in-home networks. In trying to describe these networks, we looked at them in two ways. First, what are the physical elements? What kinds of cables? How are the cables laid out? Is it home run? Is it double star architectures? Is it loops? How are they laid out? And what we find is there's a lot of similarity, whether it's a hybrid fiber coax or telephone networks. There's some kind of central office or head end. There's some feeder cable that goes out into a neighborhood, maybe further branching from there. And at various nodes, we can have either a simple cross connect from one bundle of cables to another, or some piece of equipment such as a DSLAM or a splitter, depending on the architectures. But more importantly, we also looked at the logical architecture at layer 2, and we observed that every one of the access architectures provides a means of separating traffic into distinct flows that can be given separate quality of service treatment. And in some extended materials that we've distributed, we go into detail on how each architecture accomplishes this. I won't have time to go through that today. And that same separation is carried forward in the regional and transport backbone as well, to deliver different traffic to, say, company services, such as a company provider offered voice services, or provider offered video services, or to the public internet. So in keeping with the physical architecture description, if it's a cable system, we call the central office a head end. Otherwise, it's called a central switch point in the telephone world. A first branching point is a distribution hub in the cable world, a local convergence point in the telco world. Closer to the end user, there may be nodes with splitters if this is a fiber architecture. Local convergence points might have DSLAMs in a hybrid fiber coax architecture, and so on. From a logical perspective, these service flows that I mentioned are carried through from the residential gateway, cable modem, DSL modem, optical network terminal, through an access node of some kind, DSLAM, OLT. Then several of these access nodes will be aggregated in a layer 2 aggregation network, typically Ethernet, till you reach the first router or broadband network gateway, which we've defined as the boundary of the access network, and separating it from the regional network. In some of the architectures, such as HFC, the access node and the broadband network gateway are integrated together, though there are merging distributed CCAP architectures in which these might be separated as well in the way they are in, say, DSL network. But all of the architectures provide some means of separating service flows unique to the architecture between the residential gateway and the access node, and then typically VLANs in the Ethernet aggregation portion. The logical architecture for wireless is slightly different because there may be no residential gateway with a wireless signal going directly to the end device, though we have in services like VoiceLink residential gateways for providing traditional home telephone service over a wireless link. And in the backhaul, rather than VLANs, they use a tunneling protocol based on the original GPRS tunneling. In-home broadband networks are a variety of architectures. 62% of homes have some kind of in-home broadband network. The vast majority are wireless, but we also see significant use of multimedia over coax, home plug, home PNA, which is Ethernet over telephone gauge wiring, and homes might have multiple of these, for example, using HomePlug to support multiple access points in different parts of the house for the wireless network. So our insights from the Access Network Review, the most important is to realize that the IP broadband capability of the access network, and indeed of the regional and core networks, is a platform that supports not just Internet access, but a variety of specialized IP services, such as voice over IP or video delivery, in addition to Internet access. And these multiple logical networks may differ with respect to the quality of service that they are guaranteed, how the interconnection is accomplished across operators for, say, voice over IP service versus Internet service, which are treated completely separately from the point of view of interconnection, and indeed the range of services that are available. The logical networks can be separated by assignment to separate physical channels, as in certain fiber-to-the-home architectures where a different wavelength might be used for linear video than for voice over IP and Internet access. The separation may involve a guaranteed share of link resources to a particular service, independent of whether it's actually being used, or it may be completely elastic with the other services and separated based on different priority levels. Any of the access technologies we found can easily handle voice over IP bit rates, but conversational video requires higher bit rates, particularly in the upstream, than are available from some of the DSL or other technologies that haven't pushed fiber deep into the neighborhood. In observing that we have the separation of Internet access service from voice over IP carrier-provided services, it creates some issues from the point of view of the customer that the behavior of over-the-top voice over IP, particularly nomadic voice over IP, may be different than the behavior of fixed voice over IP, not only with respect to quality of service, but also with respect to such things as how E911 will be transmitted, or how it will be determined in order to be transmitted, with over-the-top requiring more intervention by the user to tell his provider what address the nomadic device is currently located at. From the home networking review, the primary observation is that wired VoIP to the home today largely terminates on a media terminal adapter and uses ordinary analog copper feeding either a cordless base station or a regular handset. What that means is that ancillary IP-based services like SMS, conversational video, and so on are not possible because you're using traditional analog wire to the media terminal adapter. Secondly, wired VoIP to the handset is going to change user expectations about phone behavior. Today, if I've got two handsets on copper wire, even to an MTA, I can pick up an extension and join a call. I can't necessarily do that in the voice over IP world without punching in some codes to join a call in progress. We also observed that, in general, the PSTN has evolved fairly slowly. There were a small number of manufacturers manufacturing switches and line cards, and so interoperability between CPE and the line cards was fairly well standardized, and you could have pretty good confidence that every CPE was going to work with every central office. We've got much greater variation in voice over IP, both among MTAs, among codecs. You're more likely to get a mismatch. A conventional fax machine might not work with an MTA that supports a compressed bitrate codec because the bandwidth just isn't there. And so consumers are going to have many more issues in understanding what's going to work. We do observe that residences are shifting to mobile for voice service, and it may be that the device that is most commonly the voice over IP direct to the end user device is in fact a mobile phone supporting voice over LTE or voice over Wi-Fi. And we also observed that phone numbers may no longer map one-to-one with the home, as in traditional wired phone networks, or to a device in the mobile view, because people are talking about having their mobile phone ring on all their cordless handsets with Follow Me services and so on. And that's going to have potentially implications for number allocation if every handset in a home has its own number. We've identified a number of issues for further study. I'm going to turn it back to Nomi for these.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mark. So we're very excited about that study. As you can tell, I think that we're learning a lot about the access network and the backbone network as well. But we're certainly learning that the physical layer features are quite similar, and that many of the capabilities that the access networks each have are that they have a lot in common. And as Marvin wisely pointed out, that in particular they all have similar attributes with respect to quality over service, which could provide which could provide us with some solutions going forward. So one of the trickier parts of our work here has been looking at some of these corner cases and thinking about how we can, what observations we have with regard to them, with how, as to how we might be able to fuel solutions to them, how these new IP networks can fuel solutions to them. And probably a little bit flustered here, because some of our slides are I think that we don't have, this is not the latest version of slides. You all have the latest version of slides. So I'm reading a little bit from the latest version of slides. But we've observed that in particular the critical government infrastructures themselves are very dependent on TDM, and so that there are significant dependencies by the government itself on the transition. And as an example, the FAA National Airspace has some 22,000 TDM locations, we learned. So just as one of many examples of something that we'll have to wrestle with as part of this transition. We're also finding that funding for replacing obsolete devices is an issue, and often manufacturers have already discontinued or are discontinuing TDM equipment. And so we continue to look at these services that are perhaps not being modernized as they're obsolete. I've mentioned the elevator phones. The elevator phones that we need to look at new solutions for those, as the alarm industry also may require new solutions. And rather than going to it in detail here, it's something that I think we'll be conducting further surveys on and speaking about in the next TAC meeting. So next steps for our work, and again, sorry that this is like a slightly updated slide, is we hope to refine and publish our high-level reference architecture, from which you heard a really good readout from Marvin of a good chunk of it. We also hope to finish our surveys. We plan to, I think, Mark, you recommended last time that we interview some middle-mile providers, which we plan to do. And then we also want to conduct some interviews that help us to delve further into these corner cases. And then we'll report out at the December meeting.
Great. We have gotten behind. We were doing very well up until about the middle, and something about the thing 1 and thing 2 that just captured everyone's interest. So we are running behind, and I don't see any cards up, and I won't request any cards up, and we'll transition immediately to Paul.
Okay, I'll give you the 5-minute version, Dennis, so you have a few minutes.
No.
Okay.
Go take your 15 minutes.
Okay, all right.
We'll run 5 minutes over.
Okay, all right, thanks. So if I could have the slides, please. And as the team has kind of alluded to at a couple points in time from other presentations, there is kind of this ambiguous line that I think we're struggling with a little bit too, in terms of where exactly is the FCC's role in cybersecurity. I don't think anybody questions that it is a significant problem. The threats, I think to Kevin's point earlier, are clearly there. And there's clearly a desire to do some very good work here. So I'll touch on a few examples of where that challenge kind of has bitten us in a couple places. So let me skip this. By the way, these 2 slides are the fault of the FCC in terms of font size, because it was their mission statement and their charter that they provided to us. The entire remainder of the presentation being unreadable is completely my fault at that point. So,
assignment of blame.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm getting older. I think that screen used to be bigger or something. I don't know. Something's changed here. Just working group members are here. Again, thanks to our FCC liaisons, specifically Jeff and Lauren, and of course Admiral Simpson, who have been very active proponents and very supportive of the work that we've done here. So since the 10th, if we want to look at some of the progress we've made, we published and completed 2 of the work items that we had in progress. We were very nearly done when we reported out in June. We finalized these 2 at the end of July. One was kind of a broad treatment on insider threats and, sort of a triage of where the opportunities might lie there and what are some of the roles the FCC could play. And I think clearly the issue with insider threats are very real. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The other piece of work was, and that was led, by the way, by Mike McNamara of TW Telecom. And then the other work that was is also attached to this deck is some work that was done around cybersecurity processes and functions. That was initially requested to be metrics, and I think we steered a little bit around metrics a bit. That was one of those sticky areas where there was some concern. So in this case, what we did was we surfaced some of the practices and processes from some of the players in the working group and brought those to light for other people to look at. The last report, we were going to lean heavily forward on the third item on this page, which was technology specifically, kind of a forward-leaning look at what are the key technologies that the FCC might want to become aware of, to promote or actively try to steer or potentially play a role in advocating and advancing. We paused to that work over the last quarter to basically take on and explore 3 new actions or requests that were received from the FCC. So I'll go into those on the next slide. Those actions were first around drilling down on the insider threat idea, and it was specifically around this notion of security accountability. And that turned out to be the lightning rod for the working group in terms of finding where the uncomfort zones were actually at. And so we'll come back to that in a second. The second request was for some work around what has become known as security practices for core network equipment. And the idea was, is there some way that we could provide a tiered rating, a cyber rating for equipment that would allow a little bit more visibility in terms of the cyber investments and the cyber capabilities that various products have. Double-edged sword. One is it obviously exposes the capability of the equipment. The other is for those who make investments in hardening their equipment and providing cyber capability, they can be compensated for that because it's visible. And then the third piece was a collaborative work activity with something called the CAC, the Consumer Advisory Committee, which was something I didn't know existed in the FCC, that we started to broker on. And it goes back to some work that we started a couple of years back around this notion about how can we make the consumer interface with the mobile device and the security implications of that be much more tractable than it is today. Because we all recognize that it's a complicated problem, and we'll come back to each of these items in brief as I go through the rest of the presentation. So first on to the insider threat mitigation technologies. So Adam is leading that across the way here, and the whole notion of this is really, let's do a triage of what are some of the promising forward-leaning technologies that could change the game here? And you see it, well, you don't see, but if you could see, at the bottom of the chart, you'd see some ideas that we're kind of exploring there. And it turns out there are some other government agencies that are also exploring comparable areas. So, for example, what if we could get rid of passwords? And what if the whole thing could be bioauthenticated or some other means? That's one of the classic means of attack. We've specifically targeted this around insider threats, and one report that I saw from a large corporation says that of the cyber attacks that are at least known, 25% of those are initiated by an insider kind of attack. So it is not insignificant. Admiral Simpson kindly forwarded an article to me that was around the Home Depot, the latest issue, and there was an insider implication of even that attack, that somebody had actually dropped the drawers, if you will, of some of the security capability in the network, and that person I think has now been incarcerated. But so you kind of get that this is definitely a big deal, and it's not trivial to detect. So anything we can do to advance technologies that help with that, clearly what we think would help. Now to the lightning rod, the accountability mechanisms. So the request here was for key roles in the cyberspace in an enterprise or in a network operator's environment. Is there some way for those key roles to have some physical accountability? Could they effectively have what is referred to as a logbook, much like a pilot's logbook that lives with them through the life of their professional career? And could some of the population of the logbook be automated such that their tracks, if you will, are detectable? And again, that is something that's kept in a place so that as those people move from one location to another, one job to another, their credentials go with them, and then there is some accountability for their actions, whether they are illicit and intended, or whether they're just due to incompetence. And on the incompetence report, that same report talked about of the cybersecurity attacks that we can account for, 73% of them were enabled by misconfiguration or improper utilization of the capabilities that the equipment already had. So there's a very clear knowledge question here as well, and making sure we have competent people in competent roles that are accountable seemed like a very good thing. But there were some challenges that went with that, and the next slide kind of calls that out. So the first thing we did was we kind of quickly sketched out what would an architecture look like to automate such a logbook, such an accountable mechanism. And I think we concluded at a high level, technically it was achievable. There weren't any obvious technical barriers to making it happen. Not everything is in place today to do this, but we can certainly get there. I think what we then tripped into and where the member companies got a little bit nervous are with some of the issues. And we're clearly tipping into personal privacy questions here about tracking and tracing people's actions, perhaps with or without their knowledge. I know member companies also felt that they had very strong practices in place to vet their people, to actually validate that they were performing appropriately, although we know time and again that that's not true of everybody. Even large government agencies can sometimes get that wrong with some of their employees. So there was some concern about, maybe we're meddling in some space that it really isn't a technology question. It's quite a lot of other questions. And then finally, that could lead to additional regulations and requirements that may or may not be, a good thing for the industry overall. So I think that was one question that we won't have time to debate here, but one question we were going to have for the TAC was if there's any guidance for the working group in general about how to navigate these waters. We got stuck in concerns of policy and concerns of non-technical issues. So Admiral Simpson, stuck with us for this on a while. He joined a call or two with us, tried to help guide us through this. And in the end, I honestly can say we didn't get there. We just didn't find a way that the group felt that we could proceed around those issues. So we're going to have to step back and retrench if we're going to make some progress on this one. On the next item around the area of security practices for core network equipment, Romani is leading that. He's my co-lead in this work group. And there I think we've gotten some pretty good traction, several equipment providers involved. The first step, as always, is what's the state of play out there already? And 3GPP, GSMA, CTIA already have some vehicles in place to allow equipment to be vetted and to effectively publicize its capability. So the trick is winding all that together and seeing if there's a way to tier that and orchestrate that in a way that the FCC could advocate and promote it. And so you'll see some recommendations from us on that in December. The next action was around mobile device, the whole how do we make the mobile device problem more tractable for mere mortals. And this is actually pretty exciting for me, and George Popovich from Motorola is leading this because one thing that I think it was I can't remember who it was earlier mentioned the CTIA. I think it was Brian mentioned the CTIA research around how do consumers view their role in cybersecurity with respect to devices. And one of the things that struck me in that same research was that they don't think of their mobile phones the way that they think of PCs. So they don't treat them the same way. They don't view them as having the same level and content on them, when I would argue that they probably have more damaging content on them than a PC would. So they don't apply the same mental rigor to them, although they do fully accept their responsibility there. So it's very clear when I watch my wife and my daughters, it's pretty scary when they pick up their device and they don't really want to be burdened with security at all. Right? So it's a real challenge, I think. So this is kind of exciting. So we got together with the CAC and we started to work through this. And the basic concept is, can the CAC generate a list of mere mortal understandable questions that could stand the test of time that a consumer could answer, and those could then be used in the configuration of the device behind the scenes? So could there be an app, for example, or could there be a place in the service provider where the device is activated and being turned over to the consumer where these questions could be asked, that would then guide the initial settings of the device to help nail it down and lock it down in a way that they expect to use their device. And so the tricky part of that is they have to be able to stand the test of time. Now, the FCC's already leaned into this. They have their security smartphone checker checklist, but already they found in trying to generate that there are four variations of that and a simple set of 10 to 12 questions, one for each mobile OS that's out there. So the trick, obviously, is now we have four sets of questions, that some of which are the same, some of which are not. So already we have challenges. So the question is, how do we move forward on this? A couple of very simple things. let's just take that checklist, validate it, because they've done a lot of good work with the CTIA on that. And what if we were to just try to implement that as an application, or what if a service provider tried to implement those policies upon setup and turnover of the device? Second thing would be there's an ecosystem starting to emerge out there. There are companies such as Lookout Technologies that are actually building applications and utilities in this space. Are there ways that we can advocate what they're already trying to do to advance that further? Now, the one challenge we're going to have with this, so the idea was the CAC could generate the consumer-facing side of this and get the user-friendly questions. The TAC would figure out, okay, how do we make that be so from a technology point of view? And it sounded good, and then I found out yesterday when we were meeting with the CAC that they report, I guess, the last time this year on the 20th of October, and their commission expires the 23rd of October to be renewed sometime next year, presumably. So we have to get them moving very, very fast, is the bottom line here. I didn't realize that barrier was there. So next slide is just an example that I went ahead and pulled forward. It just gives you one view of the security checker that the FCC's already put into place. So there has been some good work done here. I think there's more we can do, and I'm actually very excited about this. And I don't see this tripping across the aforementioned problems that we're running into with where's the actual line. So in summary, I think what you'll see from us is Adam will continue to lead the advancement of here are the most promising technologies, and here are ways that we think that the FCC could weigh in on those and advance those. The second is we will continue to pursue the security practices for core network equipment, first reconciling what's there and then advancing best practices so that we can provide some insight to how might procurers understand the capability of the equipment and how might people building and doing a good job be compensated for the investments that they're making. And then finally, this notion of pursuing this user-friendly means to front the device challenge on the mobile device space, and can we close the gap on that to make that a little more tractable for mere mortals out there. So hopefully you'll see recommendations from us on all three of those, and we'll look to probably kibitz with Dennis Yu and maybe some other folks at the FCC about how to help navigate some of the trickier policy questions, because we're trying to figure out how to move forward, and we get stuck, and that's not productive. So we backed off on that. Let's do some things we know we can do. With that, I'll stop and give you back a couple minutes.
With that, you did a phenomenal job in covering things. It's just basically straight up 4 o'clock, so I'm very pleased. I think what we'll do, in deference to the time, if there are comments that you have for or suggestions or volunteering for help on the cyberspace, this is obviously a critical area and one that's highly visible to all of us, but to provide assistance to Paul and the cybersecurity team, that would be greatly appreciated. With that, I would like to close out by not only thanking Paul, but thanking each of our speakers, the leaders of each of the teams. You've done a terrific job in covering an immense amount of material, and as advertised at the start, I think we've all been educated in a broad array of topics, a great deal, and beyond the education, there are the opportunities for those wonderful actionable recommendations that have come out, and in some cases, actions that need to be taken relatively quickly. So thank you to each of you and to the TAC members at large, because you are doing this in a highly compensated way, and we recognize that and do appreciate the fact. And it's been mentioned along the way that the number of meetings that have been held and the time that's been expended, it really is terrific. So really thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't add to the TAC members, the subject matter experts who have joined themselves and affiliated themselves with the working groups, and there are quite a number of them, particularly in some of the groups like the mobile device theft prevention group, where it is almost all subject matter experts that have come and joined and affiliated themselves with the TAC. So appreciate that. And finally, the key members from the FCC staff, the paid members of the team, if you will, but certainly spending an awful lot of time well beyond what their normal roles would require. So appreciation all the way around. Quick opportunity, speaking of the members of the austere body of the FCC, August as well.
Yeah, Russ has got something you wanted to...
But
so Milo sent me a message he wanted me to read out because he couldn't be here for the end of the cybersecurity piece and the IoT security piece. It's fairly short.
Make it quick.
All right. Basically, my issue is around the Common Consumer Education app that helps users understand their security settings across any device platform. It's not clear that a single app can stretch across all platforms, not just Android and iOS on phones, but on tablets, TVs, watches, and other classes of devices that are consistently changing and being added, but also devices like Chromebooks, PCs, desktops, both in residential and enterprise settings. I think it's very hard to come up with really universal app that's useful but still applicable to this kind of device and user diversity. He goes into some detail then on the different OSs and capabilities. So
Hopefully he also sent it
I don't think he
directly
did.
to Paul. No? Okay, yeah, make sure that Paul and the team get it.
Yeah.
He's happy to help. We're happy to take it.
But I think the interesting thing was he was sending it to both. I really think that started the discussion with him was the IoT piece. We need to figure out an area to coordinate there.
Right.
So just to wrap up, first of all, I want to thank everybody. I thought we had terrific presentations today. There was a lot of meat in every one of them. And as we aim for our final meeting this December 4th, correct? Just a heads up, I noticed in some of the presentations they talked about recommendation by the end of the year. End of the year, I think, for our group is December 4th. Sorry about the bad news. And when we talk about actionable recommendations, I certainly wouldn't shy away from anything you want to recommend, but it would help us a lot if you can boil them down to maybe your top 3 and plus. And when we talk about actionable, try to put it in the perspective of what we really can do. Change the world is not an actionable recommendation. So it looks like each one of these groups is on a path to deliver, and really appreciate the work. We don't have that much time left. It's really a little more than 2 months, so we still have a lot to do in a short period. But thank you all.
One other quick comment. The last meeting in the year is also the opportunity to suggest great thoughts for the following year. So to the extent that you have the time now, think about where you want to redirect attack. And I do mean that. You do redirect attack. So where we wind up next year is going to be based a large part on your suggestions.
And between Julie and Walter, they've covered the other points that I was going to cover, which is terrific. So December 4th is the end of the year. Keep focused on those actionable recommendations, as Julie has said. And with that, thank you all very much, and we will see you December 4th, if not before. Take care.